Hey guys, tonight you find yourself in the bluish dark before dawn, standing barefoot for one foolish moment on a floor of cold stone and scattered rushes that have long since given up pretending to be fresh. The straw in the corner is damp at the edges. The smoke from last night's fire still sulks in the soot-black rafters, and somewhere outside, beyond the crooked oak door and its iron latch, a bell is tolling from far off across the water with the sleepy certainty of something holier than you and much better organised. Your boots wait by the wall, stiff with dried mud. Your wool cloak smells faintly of wet dog and river reeds, and the whole place has the sturdy charm of a medieval lodging that would have received terrible reviews if medieval travel brochures had not so badly oversold the rustic atmosphere. You probably would not last a week out here, not with the cold, the damp, the fish scales, and the alarming confidence everyone places in onions as medicine. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle in, tell me your location and local time, so I can picture where in the world you're listening from as this misty morning begins. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You draw your boots on with fingers that still feel half asleep, and the leather resists like a grumbling old servant who has not been paid in courtesy. The wool hose beneath are not dry, not truly, but in this life dry is often more hope than condition. You pull the cloak around your shoulders, fasten it at the throat and stand still for a breath, listening. The hut settles in the dark with small wooden sighs. Somewhere in the thatch, something tiny rustles, and you decide, with admirable discipline, not to learn more about it. The morning belongs to the river long before it belongs to men. Even now, before first light truly reaches the world, you can smell it through the cracks in the wall mud, reeds, cold water, and the faint sharp scent of fish. It draws you outward as surely as a lord's summons, though with less shouting. You stoop to gather the net from its peg. It lies in your arms damp and heavy, threaded with old repairs, patched in places with twine not quite matching the rest. A fisherman's net is never entirely new and never entirely whole. It is always becoming itself again after the river has had its opinion. Beside it hangs the small lead-weighted line, the wicker creel, and a knife with a handle polished by years of wet hands. You take them all in the practiced silence of someone who has done this so often that even his weariness knows the order. On the stool near the ashes sits the stub of a beeswax candle, burned unevenly low. You do not light it. Candles cost. Dawn, however grudging, is free. Outside, the air meets you like cold cloth pressed to the face. The yard is silvered with dew, and the earth underfoot is soft enough to keep the memory of every tread. A crooked fence leans beside a pile of split wood. Beyond it, the river mist lies low and pale, drifting over the bank as though the water has exhaled in its sleep. Somewhere nearby a horse snorts into the chill. Somewhere farther off a dog barks twice, then thinks better of the whole business. And from the abbey downstream, the bell comes again, muffled by distance and fog. Time in this world is kept by bells, by light, by hunger, by the habits of animals, and by old knees that ache before rain. Some swear that fish rise better after the first abbey bell, as if even creatures under water respect monastic discipline. Others say the river keeps its own hours and laughs at cloisters. No one can quite agree whether the best catches come from skill, luck, prayer, or simply having fewer foolish ideas than the next man. You're content this morning. to trust the net and the current and your own stubborn feet. You walk the narrow path from the hut down toward the water, and the grass soaks the hem of your cloak at once. Reeds whisper against one another in the dark. The path dips where last week's rain has not fully gone, and the mud grips at your boots with the needy affection of a poor relation. By the bank lies your little boat, pulled up among stones and sedge, black against the paling mist. It is narrow and practical and deeply unconcerned with comfort. If a king were ever invited to ride in it, he would almost certainly become less proud, though perhaps not more useful. You set the net down and crouch by the boat to inspect the rope, the thole pins, the little wooden bailer. Everything is where it should be, which in itself feels like a blessing. Fishermen and boatmen both know that one missing thing before dawn becomes 3 missing things by sunrise. You run your hand along the gunwale. The wood is cold, slick with moisture. Beneath the boat, a spider has made a web between reed stalks, jewelled with droplets. For a moment it shines more richly than anything in a noble hall. There is a custom in some riverside villages, or so old men insist after 2 mugs of ale, that you should never speak the name of certain water creatures before your first cast. Eels, for instance, are mentioned with caution, pike with respect. River spirits, never directly at all. Some wear little charms of carved bone at the wrist, or hang sprigs of rosemary in the boat to turn aside bad luck, fever, and things less easily named. You keep no carved saint in the prow, and no rowan twig tucked beneath the bench, though once, after a season of terrible catches, you did tie a pilgrim badge there for 3 weeks just to see whether heaven might notice. It did not, or else it noticed and found you amusing. You straighten and look eastward. The sky is beginning to loosen from black into a smoky grey. The first thin edge of morning lies along the horizon, not bright yet, but possible. The river takes that little bit of light and breaks it into trembling pieces. Across the water, the far bank is only shape and rumour trees, low ground, perhaps a cart track, perhaps nothing. Even now, it is hard to tell whether the world beyond the mist is waking or merely waiting. Back in the hut, you wrapped a heel of coarse bread in cloth and tucked it into your pouch. You feel for it now and for the little flask beside it, holding yesterday's weak ale. Breakfast is not a meal here so much as an argument against fainting. Later, if the catch is decent, there may be pottage, perhaps smoked fish if anyone at home has been prudent, perhaps onions stewed soft enough to pass for kindness. For now the body asks only for warmth and movement. You bend and begin loading the boat, net first, then line, then creel, then the short oar. Each motion is quiet, deliberate, and oddly peaceful. There is no audience for this hour, no market yet, no toll collector, no bargaining widow with eyes sharp as a moneylender's pin, no manor official asking what portion belongs where, only the damp bank, the patient boat, and the work that starts before speech feels necessary. When all is ready, you pause once more and glance back toward the hut. Smoke does not yet rise from it. The roof crouches dark beneath the whitening sky. Beyond it lie the rough fields, the track to the village, the little shrine at the fork in the road where someone last month left a twist of wool and 3 cloudy beads for a saint no one entirely trusts. A suspicious monk passing through claimed the relic housed there was a splinter from a martyr's bier. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether it came from a martyr, a cart axle, or someone's old stool. Still, women touch it when fevers come, and men nod to it on market mornings, because certainty is rare and gestures are cheap. The wind shifts. You catch the smell of peat smoke from a neighbouring hut, and beneath it, the clean metallic scent of cold water. A heron lifts somewhere out in the reeds with a sound like fabric dragged across a table. Day is coming properly now, though still softly. Your hands have stopped complaining and settled into the business of being cold. You brace your shoulder to the boat and shove. It scrapes over the mud with a low, unwilling groan, then slides. The bow noses toward the shallows. Water laps at the stones, dark and small. Your boots sink to the ankle as you guide the little craft forward, and the mud immediately claims one of them with such devotion that for a heartbeat you think the river has levied its toll early. You pull free with a wet sucking sound that would be comic if it were not so common. Medieval elegance, as ever. Remains an underfunded project. At the edge, where the reeds thin and the water opens, you stop with one hand on the boat. The mist parts and gathers again. The abbey bell has gone quiet. In its place comes the faint ticking call of unseen birds and the hush of current against bank. Your breath shows white before you. The river lies waiting, and so does the rest of the morning. You set one foot into the boat, feeling it shift under your weight, then the other. The wood takes you. The water receives the hull with a gentle nudge. Around you the world is grey, damp, and hushed enough that even your smallest movement seems to matter. You lower yourself to the bench, gather the oar, and look out into the dimness where the first cast of the day will soon be made. For now, though, there is only this beginning: the cold in your fingers, the worn net at your knee, the smell of reeds and river mist, and the strange quiet comfort of setting out before the sun, while most of the world still dreams on damp straw beneath soot-black rafters. The boat glides out by inches at first, reluctant only in the way all honest tools are reluctant before they remember their purpose. You dip the oar into the shallows and push away from the bank, and the reeds bow aside with a dry whisper against the hull, stroking the wood as if to warn it not to wander too far. Behind you the shore already begins to blur into mist and pale grass and the dark, low shape of your hut. Ahead there is only the broad grey breathing of the river, opening little by little under the weak first light. You move carefully, for this hour belongs to balance. One wrong shift of the hips and the boat answers with a wet, sarcastic wobble. Nothing in a fisherman's life permits much grandeur, but falling into freezing river water before sunrise would be an especially humiliating sermon on humility. So you sit low, row softly, and let the current help where it can. The oar creaks at the pin, the water curls from the blade, and each stroke leaves behind a widening shape in the mist, as though you are writing something temporary on the skin of the river. The banks slide past in fragments: a tuft of sedge, a leaning willow, a rotted post from some forgotten mooring, a strip of mud marked by bird feet, and one neat line where, perhaps in the night, an otter passed on some small private business. No one can quite agree whether otters are clever little blessings or thieving little demons in fur. Fishwives tend to speak less tenderly of them than monks do. Monks, of course, do not usually have to explain missing trout to a hungry household. The air is colder above the water than it was on land. It reaches inside your cloak and works patiently at your bones. Your nose stings. Your hands, wrapped around the oar, feel made of damp wood themselves. Yet there is a quiet ease in this discomfort. It is known. It has shape. It asks only endurance, not invention. The river mist gathers around your face, softening everything, taking the edge off the world. Even the distant abbey, somewhere downstream beyond the fog, seems less like a building than a memory with bells attached. You keep near the reed beds at first, where the channel is familiar. This bend of river has been learned with your whole body over years in the shoulder that compensates for the pull of current, in the knee that knows when to brace, in the eye that can tell from one wrinkle of water where the depth changes. Men in manor halls keep records with quills and wax seals, but fishermen keep their maps in muscle and scar. A snag beneath the surface is remembered not because it was written down, but because once, 3 winters ago, it tore half a morning's hope from your net. To the left, beyond the reeds, lies a stretch of wet ground that floods in spring and freezes hard enough in bitter winters to carry foxes lightly across. In summer, children gather rushes there, and women cut bundles for floors, freshening halls with green stalks that smell sweet for all of 3 hours before life returns them to their proper state, which is muddy and trampled. Still, people scatter rushes in cottages and in the houses of richer men too, sometimes mixed with lavender, mint, or sweet flag if they can get it, as though perfume might negotiate with damp. Some swear that sweet herbs underfoot keep away sickness. Others say they merely make illness smell more respectable. A pair of ducks erupts from the reeds with the indignant fury of creatures personally offended by dawn. You pause your stroke and watch them vanish into the grey. The river closes behind them at once, all innocence again. There is always something mildly suspicious about water in that way. It sees everything, reveals little, and leaves no witness willing to testify. You row on. The sky is lifting now from iron grey toward pearl, though the sun itself remains hidden behind low cloud. The light does not arrive all at once. It seeps. It stains the mist. It touches the wet reed tips and the beads of water clinging to your net, and turns each one briefly into a tiny brightness. A morning like this does not feel born so much as slowly remembered. On the far bank you make out a narrow path running above the waterline. It is no grand road, just a brown thread between grass and brush, the sort of path used by people with baskets, by barefoot children, by old men who know where the bank holds firm, by the occasional traveller wise enough to avoid the deeper mud inland. In better weather it leads toward a hamlet with a bakehouse and 2 pigs of alarming confidence. In worse weather it leads mostly to regret. There is a shrine farther along that path, half hidden in hawthorn, a little stone niche blackened by smoke where a painted saint once stood brighter than he does now. You cannot see it yet through the fog, but you know where it is. Someone hangs bits of ribbon there in spring. Someone leaves candles in autumn. Someone, in times of fever, has been known to tuck sprigs of rue beneath the ledge and whisper prayers for children's coughs, milk cows, lost tools, and once, memorably, a husband who snored like a sawmill. Folk do not always rank their miracles with the dignity priests might prefer. You shift the net with your foot and let the boat drift a while. The current takes hold more strongly here, drawing you past a low spit of land where the water darkens and deepens. This is a place where fish sometimes move before full light, nosing through the colder layers below. Sometimes the river teaches humility by making sometimes its favourite word. From somewhere upstream comes the hollow clop of a cart on uneven ground. You turn your head, but the bank is hidden by mist. Perhaps someone is carrying milk to the village, perhaps firewood, perhaps a load of eels in tubs for market, though that seems early even for men who smell permanently of wet baskets. The sound fades, then returns, then fades again, swallowed by the reeds and the damp air. You think of roads for a moment, of how they lead to towns, tolls, gatehouses, merchants under striped cloth awnings, pilgrims with badges on their hats. and once in a while a knight who looks deeply surprised that ordinary life continues even when he is not looking at it. But the river is its own road, and a quieter one. No ruts, no shouting drovers, no manor court waiting to fine you for a pig wandering where it should not. Only current and silence and the small negotiations between boat and water. It is a road that shifts shape without asking leave. One season stealing a bank, another uncovering gravel, another laying a branch where no branch was yesterday. Even now, it is hard to tell whether the river changes more because of weather, time, or mood. You tuck your chin deeper into the cloak and breathe into your hands for warmth. The heel of bread in your pouch seems suddenly heroic, though it is still too early to stop. Hunger walks beside every fisherman, but so does thrift. Better to wait until the body truly complains. It will, with eloquence. A cormorant stands on a half-submerged log ahead, black and priestly, wings slightly spread as though pronouncing judgment on the entire morning. You ease the oar and pass wide. Some men hate to see such birds before the first cast, taking them as rivals or thieves. Some say they are lucky because they know where the fish are. Those who tell the tale never fully agree, and the bird itself appears uninterested in being interpreted. It merely watches you with the severe air of a monastery cellarer counting missing herrings. The current bends, you follow. The familiar stretch of bank broadens, and through thinning mist you begin to see farther a stand of alders, a patch of yellowed reeds bent low under dew, 2 moored coracles pulled up beside a willow stump, the roofline of a small store shed near the landing used in summer by men who salt pike and dry nets there. In winter, it leaks. In spring, it smells of mildew and fish oil. In every season it looks as though one persuasive gust might reduce it to historical reflection. You pass close enough to the bank that your oar stirs the mirrored reeds. Their reflections break and mend around the blade. A moorhen darts away into cover. Somewhere within the rushes a frog complains. Somewhere beyond the field edge a cock crows much too proudly for an animal whose achievements are so repetitive. Morning in the countryside is full of creatures announcing things everyone already knows. And still you row. Not fast and never fast. The rhythm matters more than speed. Dip, pull, breathe, dip, pull, breathe. The body settles into it until thought becomes softer around the edges. This, more than anything, is what quiet mornings are made of, repetition that asks almost nothing from speech. A lord may wake to servants and schedules, a monk to bells and psalms, a merchant to sums and shutters, but you wake to cold water and the old wooden music of an oarlock. It is not ease exactly. It is work, yet it is work with room in it for silence. The mist thins a little more, and the east grows pale enough at last to suggest the sun somewhere behind the clouds. You see the long sheen of current ahead, the darker seam where deeper water begins, and the faint circles that form and vanish near the surface. Fish, perhaps, or insects, or nothing but the river entertaining itself. You angle the boat toward a stretch of open water between reed beds and let the current slow you there. The net lies ready at your knee, damp and patient, smelling of hemp and old water. One hand rests on the gunwale. The other touches the cork floats as if greeting familiar companions. Behind you the bank is now a soft wash of green and brown and silver fog. Before you, the river waits without promise. This is the hour between leaving and labour, between the quiet rowing out and the first true test of the morning. Your breath steadies, your fingers tighten and loosen once. The boat rocks almost imperceptibly beneath you. Somewhere far off, another bell begins, faint as memory, and in that pale, cold stillness, with mud on your boots, mist on your lashes, and the day not yet fully decided, you drift into place where the first real work will begin. You let the boat settle into the current until it feels less like an object beneath you, and more like a mood the river has agreed to support. The reeds stand behind in a pale fringe. The open water before you looks dark as hammered pewter, and the morning has reached that soft, uncertain stage when shapes are clear enough to trust only halfway. You shift your weight carefully on the bench, slide the oar in, and listen to the hush that comes after motion stops. It is a full silence, not empty at all, made of water moving underwater, distant birds beginning their arguments, and the faint drip from the net where last night's damp still clings to the cords. For a while you do nothing. This is not idleness. This is one of the river's first lessons, and perhaps one of the hardest for anyone raised on the dangerous idea that every useful thing must look busy. A fisherman spends a surprising amount of his life appearing to think very little while in fact noticing everything. The line of the bank, the slant of the current, the circles on the surface, the sound of a fish turning below, if there is one, the slight change in air when dawn finally begins to push night out of the low places. If lords ruled their estates with half so much patience, there might be fewer arguments in manor courts and fewer geese mysteriously disappearing before Michaelmas. You run your fingers along the top edge of the net, checking the cork floats one more time. The hemp is rough, the knots swollen dark with moisture. Here and there the patches show where old tears were mended under poor light by colder hands than these. You know each repair, or nearly. One near the corner was tied after the flood last spring when half the bank gave way and sent branches rushing past like an army with no baggage. Another was done in autumn beside the hearth, while a dog that did not belong to anyone in particular slept on your foot and refused to be moved. That same dog, scruffy and yellow-eyed and suspiciously loyal, has lately taken to following you at odd hours. He was on the bank when you left this morning, sitting like a little saint of poor judgment near the reeds. Whether he comes for company or fish guts, no one can quite agree. The boat turns a fraction with the current. You correct it with 2 fingers against the gunwale. Above you, the sky is no longer truly grey, but the colour of wet wool held toward a weak light. Somewhere beyond the low cloud the sun exists in theory. That is enough for now. Before the first cast, some men cross themselves, some mutter a saint's name, some spit lightly into the river for luck, though whether this is devotion or insult depends on who is telling the story and how much ale he has had. Some swear that if you hear a woman singing before dawn on the bank, you must wait for the second cast to begin, or the fish will avoid you out of sheer propriety. Others say that hearing singing means the catch will be good, provided you do not answer back. Those who tell the tale never fully agree, and since this morning you hear nothing but a coot grumbling in the reeds, the point remains pleasantly unresolved. You gather the net into your hands. There is a particular way to do this that no one explains well in words. It lives in the wrists, the thumb, the shoulder, the brief gathering of the body before release. The weighted edge lies over your forearm, the floats coil in your grip, the damp mesh hangs with the obedient heaviness of something useful but faintly resentful. You rise just enough from the bench to give yourself room. The boat rocks once, as if clearing its throat. You narrow your eyes toward the dark seam of water ahead, where current and depth meet in a way that has looked promising on other mornings. Then you cast. The net leaves your hands with a low rushing sound, spreads in the air like a grey thought becoming wider, and falls over the water in a circle that is not perfect, but good enough to please no one except those whose supper depends on it. The lead weights kiss the surface, then vanish. Rings move outward, The floats tremble. For one brief moment the whole river seems to hold still and feel the shape you have laid across it. And then the work becomes waiting. You sit back carefully and hold the line, feeling for the net settling below. The cold comes back to your hands at once. A drop of water runs from your sleeve into your cuff. Somewhere behind the mist a rook calls, hoarse and self-important. The river says very little. This is part of its character. Markets chatter, roads complain, abbey bells insist, but rivers prefer to imply. You wait long enough for the weights to sink and the mesh to draw its quiet trap around whatever the morning may have allowed. Your breathing slows to match the movement of the boat. It is easy here to begin thinking of other things, the heel of bread in your pouch, the weak ale, whether the roof by the hearth will need patching before the next heavy rain, whether the suspicious monk seen on the road yesterday was truly bound for the abbey, or merely making excellent use of borrowed holiness. He had a satchel of relics, or claimed to, and tried to trade a tiny bone wrapped in cloth for dried eels and lodging. Some said it was from a saint's finger. Others suspected sheep. The dog, for his part, growled at the whole arrangement, which may be the best judgment anyone offered. You begin to draw the net in. Slowly first. Always slowly. The line comes up slick and cold through your fingers, leaving a smell of wet hemp and deep water. Then the floats appear, one by one, bobbing in a crooked curve. The mesh rises behind them dark and heavy. Your shoulders set to the pull. The boat tips a little toward the weight. You brace a boot and keep drawing. At once you feel it not the grand heave of abundance, not some miracle catch fit to be exaggerated for years in alehouses, but the modest tug of life snagged where you hoped it might be, enough to make the heart wake a little, enough to remind the hands why they came out before light. The net breaks the surface in folds, shining with river water. Silver flickers inside. 2 fish first, twisting in the mesh, pale-bellied and furious at the arrangement. Then another, smaller, then a 4th, caught by the gills and glinting like a loose coin. You pull the net over the side and into the boat in wet collapses, and the fish begin their brief knocking panic against the boards. The sound is sharp in the hush, almost intimate. You work quickly with the knife and practice fingers, freeing each one, dropping them into the creel where they thud and settle in a faint metallic smell of scale and river mud. It is not much. It is enough to please but not enough to boast of, which suits the morning. Quiet mornings do not care for boasting. They reward steadiness, not speeches. You sort the mesh again, checking for tears. One small snag catches near the lower edge where perhaps a branch brushed it below. You mutter at it under your breath, though only mildly. A fisherman who curses every tear will have no voice left by noon. You retie the twist as best you can for now. Later, there will be proper mending. There is always proper mending waiting somewhere beyond the labour itself, like a monk beyond a sermon, ready to add one more burden in the name of the order. The light grows stronger by degrees. The mist loosens and trails low over the farther bank. You can see more clearly now the line of alders, the strip of muddy path, the leaning willow roots exposed at the bend. A heron stands there as if carved from old ash wood, neck folded, patient enough to make any human ambition seem embarrassing. Some swear that to see a heron still and hunting means the river is in a generous mood. Some say it means only that the heron has better instincts than you do. That, at least, is difficult to argue with. You cast again. This time the motion feels easier, your body remembering itself more fully. The net opens wider and lands with a neat, soft splash. You watch the circles travel outward until they disappear into the small rippling skin of the current. A little wind stirs from downstream, bringing with it the faint smell of smoke. Abbey kitchens, perhaps, beginning their day, or some cottage hearth where a woman is blowing embers back to life with cold hands and no patience for lazy wood. While the net sinks, you take the bread from your pouch and break off a small piece with your teeth. It is coarse and stale enough to qualify as a building material, but hunger improves all recipes. You chew slowly. A fisherman's meals are not luxurious, yet they are often honest bread, pottage, onions, smoked fish, maybe soft cheese if fortune has overreached itself. On feast days there may be more. On lean days there is imagination, and on many mornings like this one, there is bread eaten in a damp boat while staring at water and pretending the cold is not winning. The second haul is poorer, one fish only, and a clump of weed that clings to the mesh like a legal complaint. You clear it, set the fish aside, and breathe on your hands. The sun remains hidden, but the whole sky has brightened to a pale, uncommitted silver. In that colour the river looks less mysterious and more honest, which is almost certainly a trick. You rest a moment with the net pooled at your feet and let the boat drift. The boards smell of wet wood and scales. The creel holds the small, shining proof of the morning's beginning. Behind you, on the bank now visible through the thinning mist, the yellow dog appears again for a few heartbeats, trotting along the edge of the reeds before stopping to watch. Then he vanishes into the grass as if the earth has borrowed him back. You smile despite yourself and gather the net once more. The day has begun properly now, not loudly, not dramatically, just with damp sleeves, cold fingers, 3 or 4 fish, a patched net, and the gentle certainty that the river, for all its moods, has at least chosen to answer you a little. You gather the net again with slower hands now, not from weariness exactly, but from the way repetition softens the body into its task. The damp mesh lies across your knee and forearm, smelling of hemp, weed, and that faint mineral scent that belongs only to river water at first light. The boat drifts in a shallow angle to the current, turning so gently that you barely notice until the reeds on one side seem to slide farther away. The little creel at your feet holds the morning's first modest silver, not enough to swagger over, but enough to quiet the sharpest edge of anxiety. In a fisherman's world, relief often arrives in such small, slippery installments. You steady the boat with the oar, then let your gaze travel over the water before you cast again. Dawn has now lifted itself properly onto the river, though still in a pale and hesitant way, as if the sun were peering over someone else's shoulder rather than appearing in its own right. The mist is not gone, only thinned into long white ribbons that trail low over the surface and slip among the reeds like wandering spirits who forgot where the abbey was. Some swear that on mornings like this, when the mist lies in strips and not blankets, the river is remembering the dead. Others insist it means fair weather by noon. A fisherman learns to respect both prophecy and foolishness, because very often they arrive wearing the same cloak. You rise slightly from the bench, careful of the balance, and cast again. The net opens well this time, wider than the last, the weighted edge spreading in a soft grey circle over the darker seam of water. It lands with that familiar hush and splash, then vanishes downward, drawing the floats into a slow trembling ring. You watch them quiver, then settle. The whole act is so simple that it can almost seem sacred. No banners, no incense, no chanting scribes with ink-stained fingers bent over holy books, only your hands, the river, and the old exchange between hunger and patience. The current presses at the net below. You feel it faintly through the line. Your shoulders relax. The boat rocks once and finds stillness again, nearby. A moorhen picks through the reeds with a pompous sort of determination, as if the marsh has appointed it steward of all visible mud. Farther off, a fish rises, leaving only a widening circle behind, then another, quick and neat, so close to the far bank that you narrow your eyes and wonder whether you should shift position later. For now, you wait. Waiting is where the morning becomes its quietest self. The world is awake, but not yet noisy. You hear the plink of droplets falling from overhanging willow twigs, the hollow croak of a bird hidden in the rushes, the distant clatter of something wooden from the bank. Perhaps a pail, perhaps a gate lifted, perhaps a sleepy man discovering that one hinge has finally surrendered to rust. Somewhere beyond sight, a woman laughs once, short and sharp. Then the sound disappears into the damp air. The village is stirring, but lightly, like someone turning beneath a wool blanket and deciding whether to rise. You think, as fishermen often do in these pauses, not in a straight line but in little circles, of the hut with its soot-black rafters and half-burned candle, of the damp straw and the smell of wet wool, of the yellow dog on the bank, too loyal or too hopeful to give up following, of the suspicious monk and his saintly sheep-bone, of how the roof should be patched before the next hard rain, and how the patching will require twine, and how twine costs, and how fish, inconveniently, remain the answer to nearly every question in your life. At last you draw the line. The net rises with more resistance than before. Not a great burden. No miracle sent to transform your station and purchase you a manor with carved beams and servants who never complain, but enough to make you brace your boots and lean your weight into the pull. The floats come first, popping into view one after another, beads of water running from them like little strings of glass. Then the mesh breaks the surface, full in places, dragging with the thick damp heaviness that tells you the cast was worth making. Fish flash within it, 5, perhaps 6 at first glance, all caught in different indignities. One twists so fiercely that the mesh shudders, another hangs almost still, gills working, scales bright as polished pewter. You haul the net over the side in a shining heap, and the fish begin their desperate knocking against the planks. The sound is sudden, lively, almost cheerful in a rude way. You set to work at once, fingers quick despite the cold. A fisherman's hands learn their own kind of literacy. They read knots, mesh, fins, weight, slime, tension, all without ceremony. You free one fish by the gills, another by the tail, another with the knife helping where the cord has tightened cruelly. Your cuffs grow wetter, your knuckles flash with river water. The creel receives each fish with a dull thud and a brief glitter of scales. There is satisfaction in this, but it is a contained satisfaction. Nothing wild, nothing triumphant. Quiet mornings do not offer triumph, they offer continuance. When the last of the fish is settled in the creel, you lift the net to inspect the damage. A small tear has opened where one of the larger fish twisted hard. Not ruinous, irritating. You pinch it between thumb and forefinger and sigh through your nose. The river never gives without touching the hem of what it gives from. That is its style. Like a market toll collector, it prefers to remind you that everything passes through its hands first. You knot the tear roughly enough to hold for now and sit back again. The boat has drifted a little farther from the reed bed, into a patch of open water where the surface shows every faint breath of wind. The sky has brightened to a washed silver blue. A low bank of cloud still keeps the sun hidden, But the world is no longer uncertain. It has chosen morning. You cast again, this time shorter, toward a place where the current slides around a shallow bar and curls back on itself. Such places sometimes hold fish who like to linger where food gathers in the turning water. Sometimes they hold nothing at all except your optimism, which is generally the least nourishing thing in the boat. The net drops, the floats settle, you wait. This cast gives less. 2 small fish and a bundle of weed, with one stubborn twig caught among the lower weights. You clear them carefully. The weed smells sharp and green. It leaves slick streaks on your fingers. You fling it back into the river, where it lands with all the offended dignity of something that did not appreciate your judgment. The next cast goes wider, toward the darker patch where you saw the rise earlier. Your shoulder has warmed into its labour now. The motion feels easier, the body finding a rhythm that is neither hurried nor slack. Cast, settle, wait, draw, clear, fold. It is repetitive enough to quiet thought and detailed enough to keep you present. This is perhaps why such mornings feel so strangely restful, despite the cold and effort. The task does not ask you to become anyone else. It asks only that you remain exactly here. A heron lifts from the far bank as the net sinks, huge and pale against the low sky, its wings beating slowly as if morning itself were heavy to carry. It crosses ahead of you and disappears into a stand of alder. Some swear that seeing a heron take flight during your cast means the fish are being startled deeper. Others say it means you will meet a traveller before noon, even now. It is hard to tell whether such sayings survive because they are true, or because people dislike admitting how little they know about why one day prospers and another starves. You draw in the line. Better again. Not as good as the last haul, but enough. 3 fish, 1 decent perch among them, its flanks striped and handsome in a thoroughly unhelpful way. Beauty in fish is all very well, but it does not mend roofs. Still, you admire it briefly before easing it free. The river, for all its practical cruelty, does occasionally produce little ornaments. By now your bread begins to call to mind again from the pouch. So does the weak ale. But you hold off a little longer. There is a stubbornness in work before breakfast that medieval people treat as virtue, and modern people would probably describe, with some justice, as poor planning. Still, there is pleasure in delaying the meal until it feels deserved. Bread tastes better after effort, even bread with the texture of masonry. The bank grows clearer as the last strands of mist unravel. You can make out now the muddy path and the low roots of the willow, the place where children in warmer months leave little reed boats to sink nobly within 3 feet of shore, and farther along the broken cartwheel that has lain half in the grass since late autumn, because no one has had enough spare time or spare usefulness to carry it away. Everything in the countryside lingers longer than intended wheels. Rumours, damp, old grudges, and dogs. That dog appears once more, trotting along the bank with his nose low, pausing now and then to look toward you as if checking whether you remain employed. He sits near the willow roots and scratches furiously at one ear, then resumes watching. There is something companionable about his persistence. He keeps no bell, no badge, no obligation, yet he returns. Some swear animals see things in the mist that people do not. Some say dogs can smell storms 3 days off, spirits 6 days off, and cooking a full village away. You have no idea whether any of that is true, but he has the expression of a creature who knows more than he can be bothered to explain. You fold the net again, readying for another cast. The creel is heavier now. The morning has opened. Your fingers are still cold, your sleeves still wet, your knees still stiff in the boat, but the labour has found its shape. The river no longer feels like something you entered. It feels like the place you have become part of for a while. A moving room of light and chill and repetition. And so you cast once more into the dark water, patient as the bells, steady as the reeds, letting the first true rhythm of the day take hold around you while dawn at last settles fully over the medieval river. The net comes in heavier now, not with abundance exactly, but with the sort of modest resistance that encourages you to keep going without ever allowing you the luxury of confidence. That is the river's preferred generosity. It gives slowly, almost shyly, as though embarrassed by too much kindness. You draw in the line hand over hand, your palms chilled and roughened by wet cord, and watch the floats bump against one another before the mesh rises from the water in dark folds. There are fish in it again, 3 this time, perhaps 4, all small to middling, each one fighting with the offended determination of creatures convinced the universe has singled them out unfairly. One flashes silver-white in the thin morning light. Another twists deep in the mesh and makes the whole net tremble. You pull the mass over the gunwale and let it spill across the boards. The boat answers with a gentle wobble. Water runs everywhere at once, soaking your knees, darkening the old wood, dripping back into the river through the cracks between planks. You work quickly, because a fisherman learns early that hesitation is mostly a waste of cold fingers. One fish comes loose easily, another less so, and the third has managed to involve itself in the net with the same dramatic commitment seen in certain pilgrims at roadside shrines. A little wriggling, a little patience, a muttered word not quite rude enough to trouble the saints, and it is free at last. Into the creel it goes, thudding softly against the others. The creel is beginning to feel respectable now, not grand, respectable. There is a great difference. A grand catch invites envy, rumour, and inconvenient expectations. A respectable catch may become breakfast, trade, salting, perhaps a bit of favour with a neighbour, and with luck enough left over to soothe the face of whoever waits at home counting the practical arithmetic of the day. Hunger, firewood, rent, candle stubs, ale, patching, salt, thread, winter stores. Fish are not merely fish. They are answers in scales. You lift the fish you've just taken and judge them by hand and eye before laying them aside in the creel. A little perch, 2 river bream, something slender and sharp-headed that will sell poorly but stew honestly. This is the sort of accounting that takes place far below the notice of kings and clerks, yet it governs whole households. Somewhere in a manor hall, stewards scratch columns onto parchment while ink-stained scribes dip quills and tally dues. Here in your boat, your ledger is weight in the hand, brightness of gill, firmness of flesh, and a private calculation of what might reach the market board and what must go straight to the cooking pot. You cast again toward a quieter patch where the current eases beside a stand of reeds bent low with damp. The movement comes almost without thought now. Gather, turn, release. The net spreads, lands, sinks. The river receives it with the same unreadable face it has worn all morning. No one can quite agree whether rivers are more like old widows or old priests. Both keep their counsel. Both have seen too much. And both are capable of surprising severity over matters outsiders would not think important. While the net settles, you flex your hands and blow on them. The warmth you give yourself lasts barely long enough to notice. The chill has moved deeper now, no longer sharp on the skin but seated politely in the joints. It is astonishing what the body can get used to when complaining changes nothing. Far off, from the abbey downstream, another bell drifts over the water. It comes thin through the morning air, softened by distance until it sounds less like a command than a memory of one. The monks will be awake and ordered by now, their day divided into prayers, psalms, simple meals, cold corridors, and duties performed under the patient gaze of carved saints. Perhaps smoke is rising from their kitchens already. Perhaps a novice with red hands is scrubbing a pot and wondering whether holiness always smells faintly of cabbage. The river carries their bell to you, and for a moment it feels as though your labour and theirs belong to the same hour, though each man's burden is shaped differently. Some swear monks make the sign of the cross over barrels of salted fish before market days to keep spoilage away. Some swear it is the salt that matters, not the blessing. Some say a little rosemary laid atop the barrel helps, while others insist rosemary is for memory, not preservation, and that anyone wasting it on fish has lost both reason and herb. Those who tell the tale never fully agree. In the countryside, certainty is rare, but remedies are abundant. You draw in the net again. This time it offers almost nothing. A single fish, small and stubborn, and a mess of ribboning weed that clings to the mesh like wet green hair. The fish writhes angrily in your palm before dropping into the creel. The weed you peel away strand by strand, your patience thinning but not yet breaking. There is no point in taking offence at the river for giving less on one cast than another. A fisherman who expects fairness from water will soon be carrying on full conversations with turnips. Still, the smallness of the haul nudges your thoughts toward the hard edge behind the beauty of the morning. Fish come in slowly because survival comes in slowly. There is no heroic rush to it, no single triumph that secures the season forever. There is only addition. One fish, then another, one morning, then another, one patch on the net, one handful of oats, one bucket of river water lifted, one loaf shared, one debt put off, one pair of boots made to last past their dignity. Medieval life is built not on abundance but on continuance, and continuance has a habit of arriving damp and underwhelming. You reach at last for the bread in your pouch. The heel is as coarse as ever, thick-crusted and a little sour, the kind of bread that could survive a siege and perhaps start one. You break it with your thumbs, chew slowly, and feel the dull pleasure of food meeting need before either of them has time to become dramatic. Then the flask. The ale inside is weak, flat, and faintly smoky, but it wets the mouth and gives the body a reason to forgive the day for a little longer. As you eat, you let the boat drift. The current takes you sideways past the roots of a willow that reach into the water like arthritic fingers. Tiny insects hover above the surface where the light has begun to gather. A fish rises with a soft sound and vanishes again. On the bank, the yellow dog reappears, trotting along the muddy path with the air of a minor official conducting inspections. He stops near the broken cartwheel you noticed earlier and looks toward you expectantly, as though your profession ought to include some regular program of fish-related charity. You and me both. You murmur, though whether you mean hunger, patience, or low social standing is not entirely clear. The dog sits, the wheel leans, the world continues. You take another cast, farther out this time where the water deepens and darkens under a low shelf of bank. The line pays out through your fingers, and the net falls in a neat broad spread. This is a better place. Perhaps. Or perhaps you only want it to be. Hope has a way of dressing up guesses and calling them instincts. As you wait, your thoughts turn toward trade. The market in the village is not large, and the tolls are rarely merciful. A fish caught from the river is not fully yours until weather, rot, bargaining, and other human beings have failed to ruin it. Some will be eaten fresh. Some, If enough are taken, must be salted or smoked. Salt costs, wood for smoking costs, time costs, though no one ever writes that part down. A perch sold to a cook in a better house may buy lamp oil. A string of smaller fish might be traded for onions, coarse flour, or a scrap of wool cloth. Nothing is wasted if it can be helped. Heads go to broth, bones to stock, offal to dogs or traps. Even scales, in some places, are dried for odd household uses no one describes the same way twice. Even now, it is hard to tell whether people in this world survive more by planning or by refusing to admit how narrow the margin really is. The line tightens in your hand. You sit straighter and begin to pull. The resistance is stronger this time, uneven and alive. The net rises slowly from the dark, streaming water. There, yes. More fish. Several. Enough to make your shoulders engage. Enough to wake that quiet inward satisfaction again. Not joy, not exactly, but the easing of a knot that has been tied just beneath the ribs since before dawn. You haul the net in over the side, and the boat fills at once with sound the slap of tails, the tap of scales against wood, the wet rush of mesh, the creel lid knocking as you lift it. 5 fish, no fewer, with one broad-backed bream among them that feels almost luxurious in the hand. You free them one by one, your motions brisk and sure. The larger fish shines in a way that seems indecently prosperous for so modest a creature. You cannot help smiling at it. Now the morning begins to look worthwhile. The creel is heavy enough that when you shift it with your foot, you feel the true weight of it. Not wealth, never wealth, but enough to alter the day's tone, enough to promise a meal, a little trade, perhaps a bit of salting if fortune continues at this shy but steady pace. The river gives slowly, yes, but slow gifts still count. You fold the net again across your knee and glance over the brightening water. The mist is nearly gone. The sky above the far bank has lightened to pale silver blue. The reeds no longer look ghostly but simply wet. Somewhere downstream the abbey bell has fallen silent, and in its place the ordinary world grows clearer, a rooster far off, a cart on a road, the rustle of reeds, the soft breathing sound of current around the boat. You sit in that quiet for a moment, fish at your feet, bread in your pouch, damp in your sleeves, and feel the morning settling into its true shape. It is not dramatic. It is not generous in any theatrical sense. It is only steady, and sometimes steadiness is the most merciful thing the world can offer. You let the boat drift a little farther downstream now, not because the water commands it, but because the morning has reached that hour when habit begins to lean towards certain places. The creel is respectably heavy at your feet, your sleeves are wet to the forearms, your fingers smell of fish scales and hemp and cold river silt, and ahead, through the whitening air, there begins to emerge the low stone certainty of the abbey landing and the buildings beyond it, grey and patient against the soft rise of the bank. At first you see only the roof lines through the last loose ribbons of mist, then the shape of a little dock, half green with damp, then a wall of old stone, patched in places, with narrow windows set deep as if the building means to keep its thoughts to itself. Behind that, higher up, the abbey proper stands with its squat tower and long ranges of roof, all still dim beneath the pale sky. Smoke rises from one chimney in a thin blue line, then from another. The kitchens are awake. There is something strangely comforting in seeing monastic life from the river. From the road, abbeys can feel stern, all oak doors, carved lintels, iron keys, and the faint suspicion that someone inside would like to know whether your soul has been properly managed. But from the water, They seem almost companionable, just another cluster of roofs beginning their day in the cold. Men within are stirring embers, carrying pails, sweeping stone passages, muttering prayers before breakfast and perhaps, if they are unlucky, before chores. Holiness, like fishing, turns out to involve a fair amount of dampness and repetitive labour. You do not row too close. Fishermen and abbeys live near each other without always wanting conversation. Still, this stretch of water is familiar. In lean years the monks sometimes buy pike or eel. On fasting days they buy more, on feast days they buy less, unless a cellarer with a suspicious eye for bargains has remembered some visiting prior whose appetite suggests weak discipline and excellent digestion. Now and then a lay brother comes down to the landing with baskets, and now and then one of the older monks stands there after dawn with his hands tucked into his sleeves, gazing across the river as if expecting it to produce an answer to a theological question. It never does, but it looks grave enough to encourage the attempt. The boat slides past reeds beaded with water, and you can smell the abbey before you fully pass it. Wood smoke, wet stone, and the faint warm scent of something cooking, porridge perhaps, or coarse bread heating near the oven mouth, or a pot of beans beginning its long conversation with the fire. The smell reaches you across the water and makes your own bread heel seem suddenly more symbolic than satisfying. From the bell tower comes a single strike, then another. Not the broad tolling of before dawn now, but something shorter, more practical, marking the next turn of the morning. Time in an abbey is chopped and measured more neatly than time in a fisherman's life, but both are still ruled by things larger than preference. Bells for them, light and current for you, hunger for everyone. As you drift, you see movement at the lower path. Two figures in dark habits appear near the landing, both broad with cloaks against the chill. One carries a bucket, the other an armful of split wood. Their sandals, you think, must be damp already, and you feel for them in the abstract while being privately glad your own discomfort is at least not attached to vows. They move without haste, not lazily, but with that monastic steadiness that makes every task look like it has been going on for centuries and expects to continue for several more. One of them pauses and looks out across the water. Perhaps he sees you. Perhaps he sees only a boat-shaped smudge with a man in it. He lifts a hand, not quite a wave, more an acknowledgement that you and he are both awake at an unreasonable hour, and there is, in that fact alone, a certain kinship. You incline your head in return. Some swear monks bless the river on certain feast days, though no one can quite agree whether this is for the sake of boatmen, fish, millers, or simply because priests are reluctant to leave any part of creation unattended. Some say a blessing cast over water makes fish swim nearer for a week. Others insist it merely encourages the pious to overestimate their catch. Those who tell the tale never fully agree. You have seen enough blessed objects rot, crack, leak, or go missing to suspect heaven prefers not to interfere with ordinary maintenance. Still, there are stories tied to this abbey and the water below it. One says that long ago a reliquary was lost from a passing cart and sank in the shallows near the landing, and that for years afterward fishermen snagged bits of chain, carved wood, and once a silver clasp no one dared keep. Another says the whole story began because a novice dropped the almoner's box while showing off, and the monks invented sanctity to protect their embarrassment. Even now, it is hard to tell whether relics gather legends or legends gather relics. The river, for its part, keeps whatever version amuses it. You cast near the deeper channel below the landing, where the bottom shelves away from the bank and the water moves with a slower, darker pull. It is not your usual favourite place, but fish sometimes gather here where scraps wash down and shadows remain cool. The net spreads, lands, sinks. For a moment the abbey buildings reflect in broken strips between the floats, all stone and smoke and pale mourning. Then the current takes the image apart. While you wait, you watch the life of the place beginning in small visible pieces. A third monk comes along the upper walk, younger than the others by his stride, carrying what looks like a basket of loaves beneath a cloth. A lay servant opens a side door and props it with his shoulder, while a draught of warmer air pushes outward. Somewhere beyond the wall a dog barks once, then falls silent. Near a narrow window, a curl of smoke thickens. Kitchen work. Always kitchen work. The saints may be glorious, but someone still has to scrub the cauldrons. You think of monastery guest houses you've seen on other roads in other seasons, plain chambers, wool blankets with more ambition than softness, beeswax candles saved for moderation, long tables where pilgrims eat pottage in grateful silence, while a reader recites from some holy life no one fully hears because the bread matters more. You think of their storerooms too, barrels of ale, sacks of grain, onions hung in braids, smoked fish, coarse salt, and dried herbs tied in bunches from rafters. Monasteries have a reputation for heaven, but their earthly genius is often in keeping things from spoiling. You begin to draw the net in. The line comes heavy, but not dramatically so. A good sign. The floats bob closer. The mesh rises dark and dripping through the reflection of the abbey wall and pale sky. Then comes the silver flicker. 2 fish, then 4, then a 5th tangled low. Better than you expected. You haul the net over the side with a quiet grunt and set to freeing them while the boat rocks gently under you. A nice perch among them, striped and broad enough to interest a kitchen. 2 smaller bream. One eel-like creature that has somehow turned extraction into a personal insult. You handle that one with extra care and not much affection. Eels are valued by nearly everyone except the person currently trying to get one out of a net. There is a reason they appear in sermons about slipperiness and human moral decline. When the fish are in the creel, you glance back toward the landing. The monk with the bucket has come farther down and now stands at the edge looking out over the water. He is an older man, hood drawn up, hands red with cold. From this distance you cannot see his face well, only the shape of him against stone and morning. He watches for a while, then bends to fill the bucket. The action is plain, practical, almost exactly like your own labour in spirit if not in method. Draw up what the day offers, carry it where it is needed, return, repeat. No one can quite agree whether monks understand ordinary working people better than they pretend or less than they ought to. Some swear the brothers know every hunger in the village and simply speak of it in Latin. Others say half of them would perish if left alone with a cracked roof and no cellarer. Both may be true on alternate Thursdays. You smile at the thought and recast the net a little farther out. The current shifts beneath the boat. Light gathers more strongly on the stones now, lifting the abbey from grey into colours so muted they barely deserve the name damp brown wood. Lichen green, old cream mortar, smoke blue against the brightening sky. A rook flaps across the yard wall with all the solemn dignity of a clerk late to a meeting. The smell from the kitchens comes again. Richer this time. Oats, perhaps, or bread warmed near the hearth. Your own stomach answers at once. You take another bite of your coarse loaf and wash it down with a swallow of weak ale, feeling, for a moment, almost companionably aligned with the whole place. They have their prayers. You have your net. They have a bell tower. You have a line of reeds and the tilt of current. They count time in offices and psalms. You count it in casts, halls, and the growing weight in the creel. And all along the same cold river under the same pale lifting sky, The morning goes on. By the time you let the boat drift beyond the Abbey landing, the sounds of the place have softened behind you into little pieces: a door, a murmur, a bucket set down, one more faint bell. Ahead the water opens again, bordered by reeds and low banks, and the long, quiet promise of more work yet to do. Behind you the stone walls continue their ordered day. Before you the river keeps its slower rule. You rest one hand on the net and glance once over your shoulder at the smoke rising straight up in the still air. Then you turn back to the current, carrying with you the warm smell of Abbey kitchens, the sight of dark habits among wet stones, and the odd comfort of knowing that in this chill medieval morning everyone, fisherman, monk, dog, bird, and bell, is simply beginning. Once the Abbey has slipped behind you into stone, smoke, and memory. The river seems quieter again, though perhaps it is only that you've carried away some of the morning's human sounds with you and left them to fade. Ahead the water broadens slightly before narrowing around a bend, and along the near bank a sheltered inlet opens where reeds stand thick and tall enough to blunt the wind. You know the place well. In harsher weather it offers a little mercy. In easier weather it offers a place to pause without feeling you have surrendered entirely to comfort, which is important, because medieval dignity often depends on pretending you're not desperately grateful for a moment to sit still. You guide the boat toward the inlet with short, careful strokes. The water here is calmer, the surface broken only by tiny rings where insects touch and leave. Touch and leave. The reeds rustle softly as the hull noses between them. Mud shows black beneath the shallows, and the roots of a willow grip the bank nearby in long exposed twists, as though the tree has spent years trying to crawl away from the damp and failed nobly. A tuft of old rushes, cut and abandoned in some previous season, lies flattened near the edge. In another month or two women may come to gather fresh ones for floors, basket work, or bedding. Nothing useful in this world keeps only one purpose for long. You rest the oar across the thwarts and let the boat settle. At once the silence changes. Out in open water the river speaks in a broad low murmur. Here in the inlet the sounds are smaller, closer, almost domestic, a drip from the net, a reed tapping the hull, the faint clicking complaint of something hidden in the bank. The air smells of mud, wet grass, fish, and the last sweet trace of Abbey smoke drifting thin across the current. It is not warm, not remotely, but it is less exposed. And after the open water it feels almost like sitting beside a wall. Your hands ache now that you've stopped moving them. That is the trick of cold. While you work, it merely accompanies you. The moment you rest, it introduces itself properly. You flex your fingers, then rub them together, then tuck them beneath your arms inside the cloak. The wool is damp at the cuffs but warmer under the fold. You sit there for a few breaths, head bowed slightly, and feel the odd peace that comes when the body is tired enough to be honest. At your feet the creel gives off that mingled scent of scales, river water, and the beginning of a day's value. You shift the lid and look in, not out of vanity, but out of the habit of counting what is real. A decent morning so far, not the sort that turns into a tale exaggerated for 10 winters, not the sort that makes a merchant smile too broadly or a neighbour suddenly inquisitive, but a proper useful start. Enough fish to make the labour feel answered. Enough to earn this pause without accusation. You draw the bread from your pouch again, along with a flask of weak ale. The bread is still coarse and stubborn. The ale is still flat and faintly sour. Yet in a sheltered inlet after hours on cold water, both take on a nobility they do not possess on land. You break off a piece and chew slowly, It tastes of rye and hearth smoke and the blunt comfort of survival. This is not a breakfast designed for delight. It is a breakfast designed to prevent collapse. And in difficult centuries that counts as culinary success. A swallow of ale follows. It is barely stronger than river water with aspirations, but it wets the mouth and sits warmly enough in the belly to encourage another piece of bread. You lean back a little on the bench and watch the pale sky brighten beyond the reeds. The sun remains hidden behind a sheet of thin cloud, yet the light has grown fuller, no longer dawn exactly, but not yet the gold of proper day. It is the hour when village people begin to emerge in earnest. When smoke rises from more chimneys, when dogs commit themselves to barking, when the first cartwheel finds the deepest mud in the lane and someone immediately blames a saint. Some swear weak ale at breakfast keeps the cold from settling in the chest. Others say it merely makes misery easier to discuss. Old women in riverside villages often recommend a clove of garlic tucked into the boot against ague, or onions stewed with honey for a cough, or leeches for almost anything if they're feeling ambitious and someone else is paying. A fisherman hears such remedies all his life and rejects none of them entirely. Because every family has a story about some absurd treatment that worked once for a cousin in winter, and in a hard world one successful cousin becomes a medical authority with alarming speed. You take another bite and glance toward the bank. The yellow dog has found you again. He appears first as a movement among the reeds, then as a whole creature stepping cautiously into view on the muddy edge of the inlet. He's not large, not especially handsome, and not in any sense well brushed by fortune. His coat is a patchwork of gold, mud, and old burrs. One ear stands more bravely than the other. His tail hangs with reserve. Yet he regards you with the steady, practical hope of an animal who has drawn sensible conclusions about fishermen and leftovers. "Well, there you are, you murmur." The dog sits. He does not wag. He merely fixes his eyes on the creel, then on your bread, then on you, as if to say that while fish would be preferable, he is not a creature ruled by pride. You tear off a piece of bread too hard and stale for your own current enthusiasm and toss it gently toward the bank. He waits until it lands, then steps forward, sniffs it as though insulted, and eats it anyway. That is companionship in its most medieval form, unceremonious, hungry, and unwilling to waste anything. You chew in silence and the dog chews in silence, and for a little while the two of you share the inlet as if it were a private hall with a very poor menu. Across the river, beyond the thinning mist, the world brightens into clearer detail. You can see a strip of pasture where two cows stand with that ancient bovine expression of total philosophical surrender. Behind them rises a low hedge and, farther off, the roof of a storehouse or barn. Smoke trails from a village chimney in a blue line that bends only slightly in the still air. Somewhere beyond sight, a cock crows again, still trying to turn repetition into prestige. A woman's voice drifts faintly over the water, perhaps calling a child, perhaps scolding a chicken, perhaps doing both with medieval efficiency. You eat more slowly now, because the pause itself has become nourishing. The body likes work when it is broken by small permissions. The shoulders loosen, the jaw unclenches, the ache in your fingers settles into something almost companionable. Even the damp at your knees feels less offensive. It is curious how quickly discomfort becomes atmosphere when there is bread in hand and no immediate urgency. At the edge of the inlet a patch of water lies dark and still beneath the reeds. Folk in some villages say such quiet spots are where river spirits linger in daylight, not bold enough for the open channel, not gone enough to ignore. Others say eels simply prefer shadows, and people enjoy making mysteries out of things they cannot catch properly. Those who tell the tale never fully agree. You have never seen a river spirit. Unless one counts the look on a toll collector's face when a fisherman claims to have earned nothing that day. But you have seen odd things in the half-light mist taking the shape of a bent woman, branches floating like hands, moonlit ripples moving against the current for no good reason. A man who spends enough mornings on water learns not to deny every story too quickly. A caddisfly lands on the gunnel near your thumb, delicate and absurdly fragile. You watch it clean its forelegs as if preparing for court, then it lifts away. Beneath the surface, something turns, barely visible, making one neat ring that widens and fades. Fish are still moving. The morning is not finished. The inlet is only a pause, not an ending. You cork the flask and tuck it back into the pouch. The remaining bread you wrap again in cloth. Waste nothing. Leave nothing damp that can be kept less damp. Small disciplines hold whole lives together. In better houses there are servants to tidy disorder before it grows teeth. In your world, the disorder keeps a permanent room unless personally evicted. You lift the net and run it through your hands, checking once more for damage. The earlier tear holds. A new fray near one edge will want mending later, but it can wait. The weights clink softly against one another, lead on wood, a plain workman-like music. You find yourself thinking of winter storehouses, of smoked fish hanging in dim rafters, of coarse blankets, of onion strings, of the simple fierce satisfaction of having something put by against worse days. A quiet morning's catch is never just for the present hour. It leans toward the future, toward later hunger, later weather, later need. The dog rises when you move, alert again. He steps nearer the water, paws sinking slightly in the bank mud, and watches with renewed conviction. Perhaps he expects more bread. Perhaps he expects fish heads by noon. Perhaps he's attached himself to your routine as others attach themselves to saints as relics, without quite understanding, but with good instinct. No one can quite agree why certain creatures choose certain people. Some swear dogs follow the smell of fate. Others say they follow whichever man most resembles a dropped meal. You push gently away from the reeds with the oar. The boat glides backward, then turns. The inlet opens onto the wider river once more, and the breeze touches your face with cold fingers. Behind you, the sheltered stillness remains tucked among the reeds like a small withheld kindness. Ahead, the water gleams pale and flat beneath the clouded sky, waiting as patiently as ever. You take one last glance at the dog on the bank. He looks back, ears uneven, expression unreadable, a small rough guardian of your breakfast pause. Then you angle the boat toward the current again, cloak damp at the hem, bread settling in your belly, hands readying for the next cast, while the brightening medieval morning carries on around you with all the quiet stubbornness of a life built from work, waiting, and brief mercies. You leave the little inlet behind and return to the open reach of the river with that brief warmth of bread and weak ale still lingering somewhere below the ribs. Not enough to call comfort exactly, but enough to persuade the body to continue without formal complaint. The boat noses back into the current. The reeds fall away to either side. The wider water receives you again with its old expression of patient indifference, as if your pause had been a minor interruption in a business it never truly noticed. The morning has grown clearer now. The mist that ruled the first hours lies in shreds only, clinging to lower ground and slipping pale between far-off trees. Above, the sky is a washed silver with hints of blue trying cautiously to declare themselves through the cloud. The light no longer feels borrowed, it belongs to the day. On the far bank the muddy path is visible from one bend to the next, and beyond it fields stretch damp and dull green under the weak sun. A cart moves somewhere out of sight, announced only by the occasional knock of wood and the long suffering sigh of an axle that has known better centuries in theory. You settle yourself on the bench, adjust the wet hem of the cloak away from your knee as well as one can, and gather the net once more. Its cords are colder now than the air, the weights dark and slick, the floats smelling faintly of old river water and the many mornings they have already survived. The cast ahead feels different from the earlier ones, not in method, but in spirit. Dawn's first uncertainty has passed. This is the working heart of the morning now, where each throw of the net is less discovery than persistence. And persistence, you know, is what most lives here are made from. You guide the boat toward a stretch where the current narrows between a deeper channel and a low spit of reeds. The water there shows faint lines and little folds, the sort of movement that suggests fish turning below, or weeds, or nothing at all, if the river is in a sour mood. Hope and misreading have shared the same bench for generations. Still, you trust the place enough to cast. The net opens over the water with a soft grey spread, weights kissing the surface and slipping under. The floats settle into a rough curve. You hold the line and let the mesh sink. A bird calls from the far hedge, 3 notes, sharp and repeated. Somewhere above you, crows begin their morning disputes with the seriousness of lawyers and the manners of thieves. While you wait, your eyes move instinctively over the little signs people make too much of and too little of in equal measure. A pair of crows passes low over the field and turns abruptly inland. Some swear crows crossing left to right before a cast mean the catch will be thin but steady. Others say it means rain by evening. Others again say crows mean only crows, and that men who read prophecy in them have too little actual work. Yet even sensible people notice such things. A life spent close to weather and chance has a way of making symbols out of ordinary creatures. You draw in the net. The resistance is modest, a fair pull, not heavy. The floats come bobbing back, and the mesh rises with 2 fish in it. Perhaps 3, yes. 3, though one is small enough to be almost insulting. You haul the net in and begin the familiar business of freeing them. 1 bream, 1 perch, 1 thin little thing that seems more opinion than nourishment. Into the creel they go all the same. Medieval hunger is not delicate. A fish too small for pride may still be large enough for broth. You cast again before thought has time to grow idle. Gather, turn, release. The net spreads, the boat rocks. The line trails cool through your fingers. There is a pleasure in the repetition now, a sort of quiet narrowing of the world. All the wider concerns remain market tolls, damp roofs, salt, wood smoke, winter stores, the perpetual mathematics of keeping people fed, but for these few moments they are distilled into something simple. Cast well, wait honestly, pull steadily, accept what comes. A breeze moves along the river from downstream, carrying scents in fragments wet earth, distant smoke, something sweet from crushed grass or herb on the bank. It wrinkles the surface and makes the floats tremble slightly. You watch them with narrowed eyes. Wind can shift a net just enough to make fools of good instincts. So can currents you cannot see. So can fish, if they are feeling ambitious. This haul is better. 4 fish, with one lively enough to slap your wrist before you can secure it. You mutter at it, mostly out of respect. A fisherman who never speaks to fish is either very dignified or very lonely, and neither condition improves the catch. You free the others, clear a bit of weed from the lower edge, and lay the net across your knee again. Above the near bank, tied to a hazel branch, You spot a strip of faded cloth fluttering weakly in the breeze, a charm perhaps, or the remnant of one. In some villages people knot scraps of ribbon, wool, or linen to branches near water to ask for luck, healing, or protection from the fevers that rise in marshy months. Some leave bread there, some pins, some little carved crosses. Priests dislike these customs unless they can be renamed properly. Folk keep them anyway. It is hard to surrender an old superstition when a newer blessing is not obviously more effective. No one can quite agree whether charms work because spirits notice them, because saints tolerate them, or because frightened people need somewhere to put their fear. But when illness comes, or storms, or bad catches, even sensible hands tie knots. You cast once more, farther out this time, toward a darker patch where the river seems to pause over itself. The yellow dog is nowhere in sight now. Perhaps he has found a more rewarding patron. Perhaps he trots ahead along the bank. Perhaps he has discovered something dead and is conducting private research. Dogs, like rivers, are not obliged to explain themselves. As you wait for the net to sink, you notice how the day has begun to fill with motion beyond your own. A woman on the far bank bends near the waterline, rinsing something pale in a wooden tub. Two boys farther up the path run in the careless bursts of creatures not yet expected to turn every movement into labour. A donkey appears near a hedge, then vanishes behind it, as if reconsidering the whole morning. Human life is waking all along the river now, yet at this distance it stays gentle, almost soundless, like figures painted into the margin of a psalter. The line tightens slightly in your hand, not with a catch, you think at first, but with current. Then again, a different pull, living and uncertain. You begin drawing the net in with greater care. This time the mesh comes up fuller than before. Silver flickers in several places, and one fish has twisted itself into such theatrical misery that the whole edge jerks as it rises. You pull steadily, lean back, brace your boots. The boat tips and settles. Water streams from the knots in bright lines. By the time the net spills across the planks, there are 6 fish in it. No giants, but enough to make the creel truly weighty now. Ah, you say softly, which in this life counts as celebration. You work briskly, your fingers sure despite the cold. One fish escapes the mesh only to slap itself halfway under the bench, where it flutters like a scandal. You retrieve it with practised annoyance and drop it into the creel. Another has tangled the lower edge around its jaw so neatly that you almost admire the effort. Almost. The net gains a new little strain from the struggle. Not a tear yet, but a warning. Everything useful wears out in plain sight if you have the honesty to look. When the fish are cleared and the mesh shaken free, you pause to rub the ache from your thumb. The creel sits heavy and damp beside you, smelling of scales and river success. Not riches, not ease, but a good morning now, undeniably. The kind that justifies the cold, the early rising, the damp straw, the smoke in the rafters, the mud that tried to keep your boot before dawn. A superstition comes to mind then, one told by an old ferryman whose teeth had long ago made separate peace with accuracy. He claimed that if the 8th cast after breakfast brought more than 5 fish, the rest of the day would be stable, no broken oars, no sudden weather, no bad bargains before noon. Some swear he only invented this so he could sound wise while being wrong at low personal cost. Others repeated it often enough that it took on the texture of truth. Even now. It is hard to tell whether such sayings predict fortune or simply make ordinary luck feel ceremonious. You smile at the memory and cast again. This throw lands a little crooked. The boat nudged by the breeze at just the wrong moment. The net still spreads, but not as evenly as you would like. You click your tongue at yourself. Carelessness begins not in the hands, but in the moment a man thinks he has time to spare. The river punishes that kind of confidence without passion, and with excellent consistency. The haul is poor, as if to confirm the lesson. One fish and a branch tip. You clear both, grim but not surprised. So it goes. Good water, bad cast, bad water, good cast. Hard to say, sometimes, where fault lives. That is another reason fishermen become superstitious. It is easier to blame a crow, a saint, a stray word, or the phase of the moon than to sit too long with uncertainty. You turn the boat slightly and drift along the seam of current before casting again. The routine resumes. Crows above, charm on the branch, wind on the water, wet net, tightening line, draw, clear, fold. In this repetitive labour there is something very close to prayer, though no monk would probably approve of the comparison unless the fish were tithed properly. By now the sun is making a weak effort behind the clouds, enough to brighten the water in patches and catch at the scales in the creel whenever you lift the lid. The far fields look less grey. The reeds shine where they bend. The whole world seems to have rubbed its eyes and decided to stay awake after all. You rest for a breath with the net pulled at your feet and watch the current move beneath the boat. Signs, charms, birds, old sayings, shifting water. Little gusts of wind this morning has become a tapestry of all the small things by which people here live and guess and endure. Part labour, yes, but also part prayer, part habit, part story told over and over until it begins to feel like truth. And with another measured breath, you gather the net into your hands once more, ready to let the river answer again in whatever language it chooses. You let the boat drift closer to the near bank now, not because the water has suddenly become more generous there, but because the morning has reached that hour when other lives begin brushing against your own. Until now the river has mostly belonged to birds, monks, mud, and your own damp thoughts. But as the light strengthens and the mist thins to nothing, the banks begin to return people to the world. A path emerges fully. Smoke rises from low roofs. Somewhere behind a hedge a child calls out and is answered by a voice already tired. The day is opening itself, and you are no longer the only fool abroad in it. The boat glides past a patch of sedge and a slope of muddy bank where willow roots knot into the earth like old fingers gripping prayer beads. The yellow dog is not in sight for the moment. Perhaps he has gone in search of a second breakfast from someone less stingy with bread. The river here narrows slightly, and the current presses close to shore before peeling away again. You know the stretch. There is a worn landing ahead. Not much more than a flattened patch of mud with 2 rotting posts and a strip of trampled grass above it. But people use it all the same. Women come to rinse linen there in warmer weather. Boys catch minnows badly there in summer. Men come to argue about nets, weather, rent, saints, and whose turn it was to mend the ferry rope. As you draw in another modest cast, you hear footsteps on the path above the bank. Slow, heavy, deliberate, not the quick, careless steps of children, nor the soft inward tread of monks, nor the skittering uncertainty of someone late and ashamed. These are the steps of a person carrying something and not wishing to spill it. You glance up. A man comes into view through the reeds, wrapped in a brown wool cloak faded almost to the colour of old bark. He's broad in the shoulders, thick through the middle, and carries 2 wicker baskets hanging from a shoulder yoke. One basket is covered with cloth. The other seems to hold onions, or perhaps turnips, though from here they all share the same basic expression of subterranean disappointment. His beard is greyer than not, his cap pulled low, and he walks with the slight side-to-side caution of someone who has spent years on muddy ground and no longer sees much romance in balance. He notices you at once and stops at the landing, shifting the yoke from one shoulder to the other. Well then, he calls softly across the water, because morning politeness here means not shouting unless someone is on fire. The river has not drowned you yet. Not for lack of trying, you answer. That earns the small dry sound that passes for a laugh among practical men. He squints toward your boat, toward the net, toward the creel at your feet. Any luck? Enough to keep from lying outrageously about it. He nods as though this is the only respectable answer. No one along the river trusts a fisherman who says the catch is marvellous before noon. Either he is a fool, a liar, or he plans to raise prices by dinner. You angle the boat gently toward the bank and let the current ease you closer without fully grounding the hull. The man lowers his baskets onto the grass and stretches one shoulder with a grimace. Up close, you recognize him, Aldrin. From the farther cottages near the east field, a man who barters in small things and seems always to know which pig is ill, which widow has taken in a nephew, and which steward is likely to count too carefully on market day. He is not exactly a gossip, because gossip sounds frivolous, and Aldrin treats all information as if it were grain that must be stored dry and distributed with judgment. Out early, you say, "Market won't walk to me," he replies, and the lane is kinder before carts churn it into porridge. This is true. By midday, the road toward the village will become a brown argument conducted in ruts and hoofprints. A man with baskets is wise to take it early. He crouches near the landing and peers into your creel with the solemn concentration of a priest examining a relic he mildly distrusts. "Not bad," he says. "Perch there, is it? And bream?" "Aye." He tilts his head. "You selling all?" "Not all. No one with sense does." "Again?" "True. Fresh fish may fetch coin or trade, but a household that sells everything deserves the hunger that teaches it better." You lift the net into the boat and begin clearing a strand of weed, while Aldrin pulls back the cloth from one of his baskets. Beneath it lie onions, 2 hard little rounds of cheese, a bundle of leeks, and a loaf dense enough to knock a man from a cart. "You trading?" he asks, almost carelessly, which means he absolutely is. "What have you in mind?" "1 perch," he says, and I stop speaking in riddles and give you the latest bad news for free. Tempting, but I was hoping for old bad news. It stores better. He grins into his beard, then take a cheese and pretend not to hear the rest. You consider the creel, then his basket. A cheese is useful. Onions are useful. News is inevitable. The bargain, like most country bargains, is really over form rather than substance. You reach in, choose a middling perch, not the best, not an insult, and hold it up. "For the cheese, do you say, and only the most interesting misery?" Aldrin snorts. "Done." He passes you one of the small cheeses wrapped in cloth, firm and sharp-smelling, and you hand over the fish. The exchange is neat, almost ceremonial in its plainness. No scales, no coins, no witnesses except reeds and water and whatever saints concern themselves with dairy. This is how much of life works here quietly, between people who know the value of things without having to write them down. Aldrin slips the fish into his basket and settles onto his heels. "Well then," he says, "the steward's man was at Hob Field yesterday counting rents with the face of someone expecting gratitude. A disease with no cure, you say? So far." He leans closer, "and there's talk the toll at market may go up by a farthing for fish brought in after terce, on account of crowding." You make a face at that. Crowding caused by what people foolish enough to sell food. Aldrin lifts a shoulder. Officially, congestion. Unofficially, the Reeves sister has married a salt merchant and all at once delays have become morally important. This is exactly the sort of news Aldrin collects: petty, practical, and somehow more dangerous for being ridiculous. A farthing here, a toll there, and suddenly a good morning's catch begins shrinking under other people's hands. What else, you ask? He glances up and down the path, though there is no one near. The baker's second boy swears he saw lights by the old Ford 2 nights ago. You pause in untangling the weed. Lanterns. He says not blue ones. Then he was overtired or dishonest. Likely both, but he swears the lights moved over the water and not along it. You look toward the bend upstream where the old Ford lies hidden beyond alder and grass. The place has been collecting stories longer than it has carried carts. Some say a chapel stood there once and sank. Some say a miller's daughter drowned. Some say Roman coins still turn up in flood years, and that anything Roman is suspicious by default. Those who tell the tale never fully agree, which never prevents them from telling it again. Aldrin lowers his voice a little further, though the reeds are unlikely informants. Old Seller says it's the lantern of the ferryman who was robbed there in winter, the one who froze before dawn with the rope wound round his arm. I thought that happened near the South Bend. She says the river moved him. Convenient of it. She also says if you see the light and answer when it calls, you'll follow it into the shallows and never come back. You glance at him. Does the light call in a human voice? He nods gravely, usually like someone you owe money to. That makes you laugh, and he does too. A low, rough sound that startles a bird from the reeds. The joke sits nicely between you, dry and brief. Then the silence returns, easy enough not to be empty. No one can quite agree whether half these stories begin with ghosts, you say, or with people trying to explain why someone came home drunk. Aldrin scratches his beard. In fairness, the dead and the drunk have overlapping habits. Poor direction, unsteady judgment, fondness for appearing where they're not wanted. That is uncharitable, you say, to the dead. He grins again. For a moment you both watch the river. The current folds around the landing post, making little bright wrinkles in the water. A moorhen vanishes into reeds on the far bank. Somewhere farther off a cart rattles over stones. The whole morning feels held together by small noises and practical concerns. Then Aldrin reaches into the second basket and tosses you an onion. For honesty, he says. You catch it awkwardly against your chest. That seems excessive. I don't want the cheese thinking I traded it into a house without standards. You tuck the onion into your pouch beside the remaining bread. An onion means pottage with ambition. It means flavour, medicine, bargaining power, and, if enough old women are consulted, probably protection against half the known illnesses of Christendom. You heading to market now, you ask? Aye. Before the lane turns treacherous and before the toll-keeper has enough breakfast in him to feel authoritative. He stands, lifting the yoke again onto his shoulder with a grunt. Mind the old Ford if you go that way later. You believe the story, then. I believe shallow water, poor light, and men who think themselves wiser than mud. That's enough. It is a sensible answer, and therefore less satisfying than the tale. Still, most survivable truths are. He gives you a small nod, then starts up the path, baskets swaying, boots dark with dew. After a few steps he turns back. If the yellow dog finds you again, he says, don't feed him too well. He belongs to no one, which is why everyone ends up paying for him. Then he is gone along the bank into the brightening morning, carrying onions, leeks, cheese diminished by one, and a perch that will likely be someone's noon meal. You sit still for a while after he leaves, the boat nudging lightly at the current, the onion solid in your pouch like an unexpected blessing. Around you the river goes on in its old quiet way, but the morning feels changed now, a little more peopled, a little more threaded with rumour and barter and the ordinary closeness of riverside life. Not just fish and reeds and bells, but talk of tolls, stories of ghost lights, cheese wrapped in cloth, and the sort of exchange that keeps a countryside stitched together better than any lord's decree. At last you lift the oar, push gently away from the bank and turn back toward the current, carrying with you a fuller creel, a sharper sense of the day ahead, and one tale about the old ford that no one will ever tell the same way twice. You push away from the little landing with the oar held low and firm, and the boat eases back into the current with that familiar soft reluctance of wood leaving mud. The bank slides from beside you. The landing posts, dark and damp and leaning slightly as all honest riverside things eventually do, drift behind. Aldrin's footsteps are already gone from the path above, swallowed by grass, distance, and the practical demands of market morning. But he leaves more than a track in the dew. He leaves the faint warmth of barter, the weight of a cheese in your pouch, the onion against the bread, and the small uneasy glow of that tale about the old ford and its lights that move over water where no lights ought to move at all. You do not turn upstream toward the ford, not yet. Instead you follow the river as it bends through a quieter reach you know better, a stretch of deeper channel and whispering reeds, where the fish sometimes gather once the full pale morning has settled over the banks. This is the better stretch of water, at least by reputation, though water, like people, is not always as good as it thinks it is. The current here runs dark and smooth beneath the surface, with only little folds to betray its hidden shape. On one side the bank rises gently into rough grass and hawthorn. On the other it sinks low and marshy, thick with sedge and alder roots, places where herons stand and eels dream whatever troubling dreams eels have. The river narrows, then widens again, and the channel curves around a long reedy tongue of land that is always little greener than the rest, as though the damp beneath it keeps secrets from the seasons. You row slowly, taking your time to read the water. This part matters. Not every good place announces itself. Some stretches look generous and give nothing. Others appear dull and empty until a careful eye notices one dark seam, one shift in the surface, one set of rings widening and vanishing where fish turn below. Men speak of instinct as though it were magic, but most instinct is only memory worn smooth enough to feel like certainty. This reach has memory in it for you. You know the snag of roots near the far bend where the net tore 2 winters ago and had to be patched by candlelight while wind hissed under the door. You know the gravelly shallows beyond the alders where boys come in summer to splash more than swim. You know the low shelf of bank under the hawthorn where once, after 3 days of rain, a whole section slid into the river with a soft collapsing sigh, taking half a footpath and one extremely surprised goose with it. You know the place where the yellow dog first appeared in autumn, soaked through, staring at a fish head in the mud as if it had descended from heaven personally for his comfort. There is a strange comfort in such knowledge. A river changes, yes, but not all at once, and not so quickly that a careful person cannot keep company with it. The landscape becomes a kind of companion, the leaning willow, the broken cartwheel, the distant abbey smoke, the suspicious monk on the road, the little shrine with the doubtful relic, the bell before dawn. Each small thing remains, shifts, returns, and in doing so makes the world feel legible. Some swear every river has one stretch where it keeps more fish than any man deserves, as though beneath the water there is a hidden chamber of plenty, known only to luck and saints. Others say such talk is merely what fishermen invent to keep younger men hopeful and rivals wandering in the wrong direction. Even now, It is hard to tell whether the better stretch of water is truly better, or whether memory, once pleased, becomes a little too loyal. You let the boat drift along the deeper seam and watch. There a movement under the surface, not sharp but broad and certain enough to draw your eye. Then another, nearer the reedy spit. Small rings spread outward, break against the current, and vanish. A fish rises farther off with a neat silver flick that barely disturbs the morning at all. The signs are modest, but they are signs. Better than nothing, better than rumour, better than ghost lights. You settle the boat and gather the net. By now your hands move with that calm precision born of repetition. The damp hemp falls into place across your forearm. The weights rest against your wrist. Your shoulders know the turn. Your boots brace lightly on the planks. Cast, settle, wait, draw. This rhythm has shaped your whole morning and perhaps, in a larger sense, your whole life. Not dramatic, just exact. You cast toward the darker seam near the alders. The net opens in a broad grey fan and falls beautifully. Better than the last few. The weights drawing the edge down in a near-complete circle. The floats tremble and spread. For a moment the whole reach of water seems arranged around that one act. Then the current resumes its little mutter, the reeds whisper, and waiting begins again. While the net sinks, your eyes travel over the bank. The hawthorn beyond is still jewelled with dew. A rabbit darts from under a bramble and vanishes up the slope. From farther inland comes the faint toll of something metallic, perhaps a pail set down, perhaps a smith at work, perhaps merely a gate chain knocking against wood in the wind. The sounds of village life reach this place only in pieces. That is part of why you like it. The world feels present, but not crowded. You begin to draw the line in. At once you feel a more serious pull than the river alone. Not huge, not miraculous, but enough to wake every part of your attention. You lean back slightly, boots firm, hands steady. The floats come toward you in a crooked arc. The mesh rises dark and streaming through the surface. Then comes the shimmer, several fish. Good ones too, by the look of them. The net spills over the gunwale with a sound like wet cloth flung onto stone, and the boat fills with lively silver commotion. 5 fish, maybe 6. 1 perch broad-backed and handsomely striped. 2 decent bream. Another fish you free from the mesh with a little trouble and a brief muttered grievance. Into the creel they go, each one adding not just weight but possibility. A better sail. More for salting, less anxiety later. This is what a promising stretch of water looks like in the end, not glory, not abundance spilling from heaven, but enough extra weight in the creel to loosen the chest. You smile despite yourself. Well then, you murmur to the river, as if acknowledging an old argument momentarily settled. The net has taken on another small strain near one lower edge. You spot it while clearing the last fish and pinch the frayed spot between thumb and forefinger. Not a tear yet, but a threat of one. The river takes, even in kindness. You knot it roughly enough to serve for now. Later there must be proper mending. Later there is always mending. Roof, net, hem, rope, fence, bucket handle, faith in humanity. A medieval life is held together by repair. You cast again, a little farther down the reach where the current slows in an inward curl beside a muddy shelf. The old ferrymen say fish rest there before turning back downstream. Boys say pike lurk there. Women rinsing linen say leeches gather there in warm weather. Monks probably say nothing, though one imagines they have private thoughts on leeches. Every piece of river has its own little reputation. This second cast comes up lighter, though not empty. 2 fish and a clutch of weed. Acceptable. The third cast, just beyond it, does better again. 3 fish, one nearly slipping free over the side before you catch it against the bench. The boat rocks. Water slaps the planks. Your cuffs darken further. The creel grows truly heavy now. As the work continues, memory begins weaving itself into the place more strongly. You remember standing here once in late autumn with frost on the reeds and numb hands that barely obeyed. You remember a summer morning when dragonflies flashed blue over the shallows and you thought, for one foolish second, that life might actually be easy if viewed at precisely the right angle. You remember hearing bells from the abbey drift over the water on a feast day, mingled with singing, while you pulled in a net full of almost nothing and felt oddly content anyway. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether contentment comes from a good catch or from learning how to endure a poor one without becoming bitter. A heron lands near the far bank, folding itself down with solemn grace, all legs and patience. It stands among the reeds like a thin grey prior overseeing a very quiet monastery. A cormorant passes low downstream. Insects sparkle over the water now that the light is fuller. The whole reach has awakened into its own kind of understated richness. Nothing loud, nothing theatrical, just detail after detail, all of it familiar enough to feel almost legendary. That is the strange thing about places known deeply. They become both ordinary and enchanted at once. You take another cast, and while the net sinks, your thoughts return to Aldrin's tale of the old ford. Not because you believe in blue lights wandering over the water, though you're not fool enough to dismiss every old story outright, but because rivers encourage memory, and memory encourages legend. A drowned ferryman, a lost lantern, a novice's lie, a mist at the wrong hour, a bit of moonlight where no one expected it. That is all it takes. The countryside stores stories the way a net stores fish, unevenly, accidentally, and with more weed tangled in than anyone admits. Still, there are parts of this better stretch that do feel older than simple use. A cluster of alder roots where old women say a saint once rested, a stone half buried at the edge of the path that some claim was Roman and others say was simply always there, which amounts to nearly the same thing in village memory. A little hollow above the bank where travellers have left, over the years, a bent pin, a broken pilgrim badge, scraps of cloth, and once a child's wooden whistle. As if the place itself had become a roadside shrine without ever getting formal permission. No one can quite agree whether certain landscapes earn reverence, or whether people simply grow desperate to place meaning somewhere solid. But here, in this bend of river with its dark channel and reed song and familiar promise, it is easy to feel that the world remembers more than it says. Your next haul is another good one. 4 fish, one of them broad enough to make market bargaining worthwhile. You free them and settle them into the creel with quick, wet hands. The smell of scales rises sharp and clean. The boat is a mess of river water, weed fragments, and useful life, a glorious mess by local standards. At last you rest the net across your lap and look around. The better stretch has lived up to itself this morning, whether by luck, skill, memory, or the simple fact that you know how to meet it properly. The bank glows greener now, the alders stand dark and still, the current folds on, secretive as ever. Behind you lie the abbey, the landing, the bread break, the barter, the tale of ghost lights. Before you lies more river, more labour, and the slow bright climb toward noon. But here, in this reach, you feel the quiet satisfaction of being exactly where you ought to be. in a landscape worn familiar enough that every reed and ripple seems part of a story you've been living all along. The better stretch of water slips behind you slowly, not because you are eager to leave it, but because the morning has moved on and you must move with it. The creel at your feet has become heavy enough now that each time the boat shifts, you feel the catch answer with a damp, substantial nudge against the planks. It is a satisfying weight, though not a luxurious one. Luxury belongs to other people, to thick carpets, dry corridors, polished cups, and servants with fewer fish scales on their sleeves. Your kind of satisfaction is humbler. It smells of river water, wet hemp, and the quiet relief of knowing the morning has yielded enough to make the next few hours less sharp. Still, the river takes as steadily as it gives, and the first sign of that sits across your lap in the form of the net. You lift it again, not to cast immediately, but to inspect it properly at last. In the rush of hauling and sorting, you have noticed the frayed place low along one edge, the rough knot made quickly to hold it for now, the swollen cords where earlier strains pulled harder than they ought. When a tool feeds you, you learn not to ignore its complaints, so you let the boat drift in a gentler run of current near a sloping grassy bank, set the oar across the thwarts, and bend your head over the mesh. The sunlight, weak though it still is through the high cloud, has strengthened enough now to show every fault more clearly. The hemp cords shine damp and dark. Here a knot has tightened into stubbornness. There a strand has begun to unravel, not torn cleanly, but worrying apart fibre by fibre like an old grievance. Near the weighted edge, one loop has stretched wider than the others, another patch, mended long ago with a different twine, has held admirably but looks offended at being asked to continue. You click your tongue softly. The sound is not anger, it is recognition. A fisherman's life, for all the river and mist and birds and other pretty things that people with dry boots like to imagine, depends on maintenance, endless, patient, humble maintenance. Nets fray, oars split, ropes stiffen, leather cracks, wood swells, shrinks, leaks, loosens. The world is full of things trying to fall apart just a little faster than a human hand can mend them, and most days, survival is simply the art of staying close enough behind the ruin. You reach into the little pouch tucked beneath the bench and take out a coil of spare twine and the small netting needle carved from smooth bone. It is not much to look at. No gilding, no carved saints, no silver caps, no ornament worth remarking upon. Yet in your hands it matters more than many objects found in manor chambers. A noble may admire a jewelled cup. You admire a tool that prevents supper from swimming away through a hole the width of your thumb. You begin the repair. The boat drifts quietly while you work, the bank sliding past in green and brown reflection. Your fingers are clumsy at first with cold and damp, but soon the old rhythm returns. Under, through, draw tight, under, through, draw tight. The motions are close and repetitive, and in their own way they are as calming as the casting itself. A good repair asks for attention but not urgency. It narrows the world to chord, knot, tension, shape. The hands understand what the mind might only clutter. There is a medieval honesty in mending that grander people often miss. Everything humble is always on the edge of requiring care. Wool cloaks need patching at the shoulder, shoes need resoling, buckets need hoops reset, roofs need thatch tucked, then retucked. Oak doors swell and sulk in wet weather. Iron keys rust if neglected, blankets wear thin, pots soot over, cartwheels loosen, and nets, perhaps most of all, never stop asking for one more knot. No one can quite agree whether the world was made fragile, or whether people only notice fragility once they are poor enough to have to fix it themselves. You glance up for a moment while the boat turns gently in the current. The near bank here is low and open, spotted with tufts of grass and rushes. Beyond it lie fields where spring growth has begun but not yet committed itself to confidence. A scarecrow leans crooked near one strip of newly turned soil, less threatening than apologetic, its stick arms wrapped in what may once have been a respectable tunic and is now mostly weather. Farther off, a woman bends over a patch of ground with a basket at her feet, gathering greens or herbs, perhaps nettles for pottage, perhaps sorrel, perhaps some bitter remedy to boil with honey and insist upon when fever comes. Old country cures travel faster than merchants and with less baggage. Some swear that tying a sprig of yarrow into the first repaired knot of a net will keep it from tearing again for a month. Others claim saint's herb must be used instead, and others again say all such customs are nonsense unless performed on the proper feast day. Those who tell the tale never fully agree. Yet many fishermen tuck some little charm into their gear all the same, a bit of rowan bark, a token from a shrine, a thread blessed by a passing pilgrim, a bead rubbed smooth by anxious fingers. You have never made a habit of it, though once, after a season so poor even the dog stopped expecting much. You did tie a tiny strip of cloth from the roadside shrine into the upper cord. The catch improved 3 days later. Whether this proves heavenly favour or ordinary weather, the shrine has never been shy about taking credit. You continue stitching. The torn section near the weighted edge takes longer. A careless repair there would leave the net lopsided in the water, and then every cast would sag, and then the fish would find the weakness before you did, and then all your fine medieval resilience would end in a dinner of resentment. So you work slowly, shaping each knot to match the old mesh as best you can. Your shoulders relax as you bend over it. The little boat rocks now and then, but gently. Water slips along the hull with the soft sound of cloth dragged over stone. By the time you finish the second repair, the ache in your neck has announced itself. You sit back and stretch, hearing a faint crackle in your shoulders like someone crumpling dry reeds. The creel shifts. A fish within gives a last weak knock against the wicker. Above, a gull wheels inland from the broader water, white against the paling sky, and vanishes beyond the fields. The morning has fully ripened now into day. The silver hush of dawn is gone. In its place there is a steadier brightness, still mild, but clearer, more practical, the sort of light in which flaws cannot hide. That, perhaps, is why so much mending is done by morning or early noon if it can be managed. In candlelight everything seems more forgivable than it truly is. You take the net up again and run it between your fingers, feeling for snags, weak places, rough knots, any little resistance that might signal trouble later. This tactile knowing is its own form of reading. Ink-stained scribes read charters, monks read psalters, stewards read tallies. You read chord and tension, and the give of hemp under wet fingers. A fisherman who does not know his own net by touch deserves every empty cast. A memory comes then, unbidden, of mending by hearthlight in midwinter while sleet rattled at the shutters and the hut smelled of damp wool, fish smoke, and onions softening in a pot. The half-burned beeswax candle on the stool had guttered low. The yellow dog, having somehow found his way inside as if invited by no one but cold itself, slept curled against the door with the expression of a creature who had personally invented loyalty. You had repaired a long rip then, worse than this one. While outside the wind leaned on the walls and the abbey bell came dull through the dark. The repair held for months, longer, perhaps, than some promises made under better roofs. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether tools grow more faithful when repaired with care, or whether men simply trust more deeply what they have worked hardest to save. Either way, the bond is real. The net across your lap is not an object at a distance. It is a companion in labour, troublesome, useful, never quite finished, and far too necessary to be romantic about for long. You pull a final knot tight with your teeth and trim the twine end with the knife. That will do, not perfect perhaps, but good enough to continue, which is the true standard by which most things in this life are judged. You set the bone needle aside and take the oar again, giving the boat a small corrective push away from the bank. The hull turns. The water opens wider ahead. A line of reeds shivers in the breeze. Somewhere on the far side of the river a cow lows with deep theatrical dissatisfaction, as if protesting existence itself. A cart rattles faintly from the road beyond the hedge. Noon is still some distance away, but the day is no longer young. Soon the fish will move differently. Soon the market will matter more than the catch. Soon there will be sorting, carrying, and the long walk back through mud with your shoulders reminding you of every decision you have ever made. Still, for this moment you feel a small quiet pride. Not because the work is finished, it never is, but because one more thing has been kept from failing, one more tear has been closed, one more useful object has been persuaded to remain in service. There is deep medieval dignity in that, though no troubadour would sing it quite so enthusiastically. Songs prefer battles and queens. Real life is much more often a man in a damp boat, knotting twine into a net while his dinner depends on whether he misses any weak spots. You cast once more after the repair, partly to test it, partly because no fisherman trusts a mend until the river has tried it. The net opens, falls, and sinks with a cleaner line than before. Better. The floats settle evenly. You wait, watching closely. No strange sag. No obvious strain. Good. When you draw it in, the haul is modest, 2 fish and a weed tangle, but the mesh holds fast. That is enough to satisfy you. A repair proven in water carries more comfort than 10 admired on land. You clear the fish, drop them into the creel, and settle the net once more across your knee. Stronger now than it was an hour ago, though still not beyond future trouble. Nothing ever is. But the morning has taught its lesson. Gently the river takes, the river gives, and between those two truths lies all the patient mending by which a fisherman's life avoids unravelling entirely. When at last you turn the boat homeward, it is not with drama, not with the feeling of some grand voyage completed, but with the plain inward shift by which working mornings begin to gather themselves toward land. The creel at your feet is heavy now, heavy enough that you move it carefully with one boot before settling the oar in place. The net, newly mended in 2 more places and wet with all the river's opinions, lies in a dark fold beside your knee. Your hands ache. Your sleeves cling coldly at the forearms, and your shoulders carry the dull, honest weight of labour well enough spent. This is how a useful morning ends in the medieval world, not with triumph, but with something sturdier and quieter than triumph, with enough. You dip the oar and let the boat answer. The bow turns slowly, then commits itself downstream toward the familiar banks, the village beyond, the smoky promise of hearth and board and practical reckoning. The better stretch of water slips behind you. The reeds part and close. The current takes hold in a friendlier direction now, helping where earlier it resisted. Even the river, it seems, can sometimes be persuaded to cooperate once its point has been made. The sky has brightened into a pale, steady day, still veiled by thin cloud, but full enough now that every bank and branch appears plainly. The silver softness of dawn has gone. What remains is the clear-faced hour when people begin doing visible things in earnest. Smoke rises from cottages in more certain lines. Paths that seemed dreamy and half-made in the mist now show every rut, tuft, and muddy hollow. Crows pick at the edge of a field with the grim purpose of tax collectors. A woman in a blue hood walks along the far bank with a bucket balanced against one hip. Somewhere inland a hammer rings faintly against metal, patient and repetitive as prayer. You row at an even pace, not hurried, because hurrying in a loaded boat is an excellent way to become a cautionary tale. The oar pulls cleanly through the water. The hull rocks gently. Each stroke sends little V-shaped ripples out behind you, briefly writing your passage on the river before it smooths itself over and forgets. That forgetting is part of the river's arrogance. Men leave stories. Water leaves only damp. You glance down at the catch again, as if the fish might have altered while you were not looking. They have not. Perch, bream, smaller river fish, a morning's worth of silver and grey and modest good fortune. You begin the arithmetic automatically. 1 or 2 kept aside for the household while they are freshest. A few for sale if the market board is not too crowded, and the toll-keeper not too inventive. Some perhaps traded for salt if the price is not outrageous. 1 fish, maybe. Promise to the Abbey kitchen if a lay brother comes asking and the bargain sounds fair. A small catch is easy to eat and too little to save. A good catch requires judgment. That is the burden hidden inside plenty. No one can quite agree whether a fisherman's life is harder on the back or the mind. The body rows, casts, lifts, mends. The mind counts, weighs, plans, withholds, bargains, remembers what winter cost and what spring still threatens to cost. Even now, with the creel respectably full and the river behaving almost decently, you do not think in terms of ease. You think in terms of what portion of the river's gift will survive contact with the rest of the world. You pass again by the lower reaches near the Abbey lands, though at a greater distance now. The stone buildings sit pale and damp beneath the late morning sky, smoke drifting from the kitchens in a calmer, straighter line. The bells are silent for the moment, but the place still seems full of their memory. A figure in a dark habit crosses the yard with something long and wooden on one shoulder, perhaps a rake, perhaps a pole for the drying yard. Another bends near the landing. The day there has thickened into labour, just as yours has. Some swear monks live above ordinary work, others have never watched a cellarer haul sacks. Holiness may elevate the soul, but it still expects someone to fetch water. You smile to yourself and row on. The smell from the Abbey reaches you only faintly now, a trace of smoke and cooking grain, but it nudges hunger awake again. The bread and weak ale from the sheltered inlet have long since become memory. The cheese from Aldrin sits wrapped in your pouch like a compact reward, and the onion beside it feels almost luxurious. You think already of what might be done with them. Fish stew thickened with barley, if there is enough. Pottage sharpened with onion and a shaving of cheese. A heel of bread softened in broth until it pretends to be tender. Medieval meals do not need much imagination because necessity provides the menu with tiresome consistency. As you drift past the little landing where you met Aldrin, you glance toward the path. He is gone, of course, well on his way by now to market, baskets swaying, boots muddy, information distributed where it will do the most socially useful harm. The landing itself looks unchanged, the 2 rotting posts, the flattened patch of grass, the soft mud cut by footprints, and a line where something heavy was dragged recently. A moorhen picks at the edge, then darts away. The place seems smaller in daylight than it did earlier, less like a stage for rumour and barter and more like what it is, a workable edge between land and water. Yet the morning clings to it. Aldrin's cheese, his news of tolls, the tale of blue lights at the old ford, such things settle into a day like silt. You row on. The village grows more present with every bend. At first it is only hints, a distant roofline above hedges, a wash of smoke, the bark of a dog. Then more details gather. A fenced patch of cabbage ground. A cart track running down to the water's edge. A line of laundry hung low between poles. Pale shirts and darker cloth stirring only slightly in the weak breeze. 2 geese march through mud with all the confidence of creatures unaware they exist mainly as future complaints. The world has left its bedside and is fully dressed now, though not attractively. The nearer you come to shore, the more the ordinary costs of the day return. Market tolls, yes, but also the weight of carrying the creel up from the boat, the cleaning to be done, the sorting, the salting, if enough is spared, the smokehouse if wood can be spared, the question of whether the freshest fish should go first to the board or first to the pot. A fisherman's morning is not truly finished when the boat turns landward. It merely changes from river work to all the work the river creates behind it. Some swear the hardest part of fishing is the weather. Others say the hardest part is never letting a good catch tempt you into foolish generosity before winter. Those who tell the tale never fully agree. But every household knows the rhythm: hope at dawn, labour by water, arithmetic by noon. A shape appears ahead near the bank, low and yellowish among the reeds. For one hopeful moment you think it might be a bundle of old rushes. Then it lifts its head, and there is your persistent companion, the yellow dog, waiting near the muddy path where it dips toward the shore. He stands, stretches extravagantly, and watches your approach with the solemn expectancy of someone who believes he has invested heavily in this enterprise and is now due a return. You again, you say. The dog gives no sign of embarrassment. He trots along the bank as you row parallel to him, sometimes disappearing behind reed clumps, then reappearing, as if escorting you back under no formal contract. There is something pleasing about it, though you would deny this if asked directly. Men who live close to want learn not to make too much of affection, when practical motives might explain it just as well. Still, a dog that keeps following you through a morning begins to feel like part of the landscape, no less familiar than the broken cartwheel or the doubtful shrine by the road. Ahead at last lies your own small riverside place, the patch of trampled ground, the leaning fence, the hut crouched under its weathered roof. In daylight it looks even more honestly poor than it did before dawn. The walls are dark with old damp. The roofline bows a little where patching must soon happen whether you prefer it or not. One shutter hangs with the slight, habitual crookedness that would shame a richer house and barely qualifies as noteworthy here. Yet after hours on the river, it appears welcoming all the same, a place to set down the catch, a place where the smoke in the rafters is your own smoke, the rushes underfoot your own worn rushes, the cold stone floor your own particular disappointment. You angle the boat toward the familiar muddy edge. The dog reaches the bank first and waits, tail low but moving once, perhaps twice. The water shallows. The hull nudges reeds aside. You set the oar, brace one foot, and let the boat slide in until the bottom brushes mud with a long soft scrape. There is always a moment in landing when the body must shift from boat balance to earth balance, and it is a more awkward transition than anyone admits. You rise carefully, creel heavy in one hand, one boot finding the bank, then the other. The mud takes your weight at once with its usual enthusiasm. For a heartbeat you wobble with all the elegance of a saint stepping off a reliquary. Then you steady. The dog comes forward immediately, nose working, eyes fixed on the creel with devotional intensity. You laugh under your breath and nudge him gently aside with a knee. Patience, you say, you are not a lord. He seems unconvinced by this distinction. You drag the boat up just enough to keep it from floating off in some fit of independent ambition, secure the rope around the post, and stand for a moment looking back over the water. The river lies pale beneath the cloud, calmer now, stripped of mist and mystery, merely a broad, practical thing carrying light and current past reeds and fields and abbey stones. Yet the whole morning still seems to hover over it the first bell, the cold hut, the cast net, the abbey smoke, Aldrin's gossip. The better stretch of water, the careful mending, the quiet labour of it all. Then the real next part begins. You lift the creel again, feeling the pull in your shoulder, and turn toward the hut. The dog falls in beside you as if invited. The path is damp. The fence leans. Smoke from a nearby chimney drifts low and sweet. Somewhere up the lane a cartwheel hits a rut, and someone curses in that weary devotional tone reserved for routine disaster. All of village life is fully awake now, and soon you must decide what leaves this yard for sale and what stays for the table. For the moment, though, you have done the river part. You have brought the morning back with you in wicker and wet hemp and aching arms, and that alone feels like a small, workmanlike victory as you carry the catch toward home. You carry the creel into the yard with the slow, careful gait of someone who has spent all morning balancing in a boat and now must remember that land, though less wet in theory, is often no more forgiving. The dog pads after you close enough to count as impertinent, nose lifted, eyes fixed with unwavering faith upon the wicker basket swinging from your hand. The hut waits ahead under its sagging roof, the crooked shutter still hanging at that familiar angle that suggests both neglect and longevity. Smoke from a neighbouring chimney drifts across the lane and mingles with the smells rising from your own catch river water, weed, scales, and the first sharp edge of fish beginning to leave the realm of movement and enter the realm of food. You set the creel down on the low bench beside the door and roll your shoulder once, feeling the ache settle there like a small tax collected in private. The dog sits immediately, so promptly and so squarely that for a moment he resembles some shaggy little saint of opportunism carved badly in wood. His ears lift, his tail stays still. All attention is directed toward the basket. You will get what is proper, you tell him. He receives this with the grave skepticism of the poor. Inside the hut, the air feels warmer than outside, though only by comparison. The soot-black rafters hold the smell of old smoke and damp straw. The rushes underfoot are flattened and tired. A little light comes through the shutter crack in the open door, enough to catch on the iron hook by the hearth, the half-burned beeswax candle on the stool, the wool blanket folded rough over the sleeping corner. Everything looks exactly as you left it, which is one of the chief comforts of humble homes. They rarely have the energy for surprises. You fetch the wooden pail, the gutting knife, a shallow bowl, and the coarse sack of salt kept tied near the shelf where damp can reach it only after making a sincere effort. Then you carry the lot back outside. Fish are best dealt with in the yard if the weather allows. Better the gulls, flies, and dog take interest there than inside among the blankets. Better the mess belong to the ground than the floor. Better, too, to have daylight while deciding what will be eaten fresh, what must be sold, and what is worth salting before noon warmth makes decisions on your behalf. The bench beside the hut serves as your board, It is scarred by years of use-fish, kindling, rope, rush bundles, one unfortunate turnip harvest, and once, memorably, a goose that fought the entire idea of supper with admirable conviction. You open the creel. The fish lie within in a bright damp heap, their scales catching the pale day in brief silver flashes. The sight pleases you again, not because you have forgotten the labour that earned it, but because labour becomes easier to trust once it can be counted. You begin lifting the fish out one by one, laying them along the board by size and kind, perched together, bream together, smaller river fish in a separate row. The arrangement is practical, though there is something almost ceremonial in it too, like setting out proof before judgment. The dog inches forward. Not yet. He stops, but only because he knows stopping briefly may improve his standing. This sorting matters. Fish for the household should be the freshest looking of the smaller catch, the ones not worth the best bargain but too good to waste on anyone else's kitchen. Fish for sale must be chosen with a sterner eye, firm flesh, clear gills, no damage from the net that would lower a price in the mouth of some market woman already determined to act insulted. Fish for salting need enough substance to justify the salt itself, because salt is dear, and no one with sense scatters it like flour at a feast. A poor choice here becomes 3 poor choices later. No one can quite agree whether bad fortune begins with weather, debt, or one tired decision made too quickly near noon. You run your thumb lightly along the flank of a broad-backed perch. Good. That one might fetch a decent trade, if the tolls have not grown even more absurd since dawn. Beside it lies a bream with a slight net mark near the gill. Fine for the pot, less fine for display. A smaller fish, thin but clean, goes into the household pile. Another, slightly bruised from its energetic opinion in the boat, is set aside nearer the dog's future hopes. You think of Aldrin's cheese wrapped in cloth in your pouch, of the onion beside it, and the day's meal begins to suggest itself. Fish broth, perhaps, with onion and the bread heel softened in the pot, thickened if there is little barley left, or one fish pan-roasted on the hearthstone with the cheese shaved over coarse bread. Dreams of grandeur, really? Still, a decent morning permits a little planning. At the far end of the yard there hangs a short line beneath a crude lean-to roof, where fish are sometimes gutted and rinsed if rain comes. Today the sky holds steady enough, so you remain at the bench. You take up the knife and begin. There is no haste in this work, but there is rhythm. Slice, clean, rinse, set aside. Slice, clean, rinse, set aside. The pail receives what the household will not eat, though the dog watches each scrap as though personal betrayal is being committed repeatedly and on purpose. Gulls cry somewhere overhead, not yet bold enough to descend but clearly interested in developments. The smell sharpens as you work. River freshness gives way to blood, brine, innards, and wet wood. Not pleasant, perhaps, to anyone sentimental about the countryside, but entirely familiar. Medieval life rarely smells like the songs say it should. Women at market, you know, will later lift fish by the tail and peer into the gills with expressions of priestly disappointment, as if every perch ought to arrive polished, perfumed, and already seasoned. But here on the board the truth is simpler. A fish is labour changed into flesh. What cannot be sold must be eaten. What cannot be eaten must be given to dog, cat, trap, or soil. Waste is a luxury, and not a Christian one. Some swear the first fish cleaned after a good catch should have a pinch of salt dropped upon its head before gutting, to keep envy away from the rest. Others say the pinch belongs in the fire, not on the fish, to stop the evil eye from souring the barrel. Those who tell the tale never fully agree. You have never had enough spare salt to dedicate much of it to invisible dangers, but you do mutter, out of habit more than belief, "Stay wholesome," as you lay a cleaned perch aside. Whether this is prayer, superstition, or merely polite conversation with your dinner is difficult to say. The dog whines once softly. You give him the damaged fish head at last. He takes it with instant reverence and retreats 3 paces as if granted a private estate. There he lies down and attends to it with a seriousness that would flatter a bishop. By the time half the catch is cleaned, the yard is filled with the ordinary sounds of the village fully underway. A cart rattles past on the lane beyond the leaning fence, wheels striking stones hard enough to make the whole thing sound assembled by revenge. Somewhere nearby, a woman beats linen against a board in rhythmic slaps. A child laughs, then begins crying, likely for reasons both intense and temporary. A rooster crows again from sheer loyalty to routine. Smoke rises from 3 different chimneys, each with its own note peat, wood, damp straw. The world has become busier, rougher, less enchanted than it was out on the misty water. Yet this, too, has its comfort. The day is now shared. Everyone is working at something. You pause long enough to wipe your hands on a rag and take out the onion and cheese. The onion is firm and sharp-smelling, a small brown moon of possibility. The cheese, unwrapped, shows itself pale and crumbly, better than anything that usually falls into your keeping without argument. Aldrin traded fairly, which is either kindness or strategy. With him the difference is mostly decorative. You set aside the best 2 fish for market or barter, and choose several middling ones for salting. Then you fetch the shallow earthenware crock from inside and spread a thin layer of coarse salt over the bottom. Fish, salt, fish, salt, not lavishly, just enough. The salt grains cling to your damp fingers and sting where the net has roughened the skin. You work carefully, laying the fish in close, as neat as relics in a miserly shrine. Preservation is one of the countryside's most sacred arts, though it receives very little singing. Monasteries understand this better than noble halls, so do fishermen, widows, and anyone who has ever seen a winter storehouse by lamplight and known exactly how long it must last. A little farther along the board, the sailfish lie cleaned and brighter now, their scales dulled just enough to look respectable rather than fresh-caught chaotic. You imagine the market board already women with baskets, men with mud to the knee, traders fingering onions and smoked eels, boys darting where they should not, toll collectors stationed like a moral disease near the entrance, and someone somewhere insisting that last week's prices were better despite all evidence. The fish will go there if it proves worth the walk, or perhaps one perch will go to a neighbour for barley, or to the Abbey kitchen for lamp oil or favour. Selling is never only selling. It is part bargaining, part performance, part weather, and part local history. Even now it's hard to tell whether markets run on coin, need, or mutual irritation. You finish cleaning the last of the smaller fish and rinse the knife. The pail now holds scraps enough for stock, dog, or ditch, depending on what discipline and appetite require. The crock of salted fish sits ready in the shade. The household portion lies near the door, wrapped in cloth against flies. The sailfish are lined neatly on the board, waiting judgment like modest prisoners. You stand and stretch, looking out over the yard. The river glints pale beyond the reeds. The fence leans no straighter than before. The dog has finished his reward, and now sits licking his paws as if he's done all the work and finds the supervision exhausting. On the path beyond, Two women pass carrying bundles of wash, talking low and quick in the way of people whose words travel faster when their hands are occupied. One glances toward your bench, notes the fish, and gives the small nod of someone storing useful information for later. In a village, very little remains private once it can be cooked. You gather the sailfish into a clean cloth and bind the corners. Not too tight. They must still look worth buying when opened again. Then you lift the little crock and carry it inside to the coolest corner you have, near the wall where the stones stay dark longest into the day. The cheese follows, then the onion, then the household fish for the pot. Back outside, you throw the remaining scraps farther off near the ditch for the dog and any cats bold enough to negotiate with him. He charges after them with an enthusiasm no sermon could improve. At last the bench is nearly clear. The morning's catch has become portions, plans, and promise food for the table, fish for trade, fish for keeping. Quiet labour on the river has been translated into survival on land, which is the truest magic most medieval people ever witness. You wipe the board one final time, rinse your hands from the pail, and stand in the yard breathing smoke, salt, fish, and the faint damp sweetness of rushes by the door. Behind you, the hut waits with its dark rafters and small warmth. Ahead lies the question of market, of barter, of whether the village appetite and the toll-keeper's temper can be endured. But for now, the catch is sorted, the salting done, the selling considered, and the whole quiet morning has taken on its practical final shape. By the time the fish are sorted and the yard no longer looks like the river has personally argued with your bench, the village has woken all the way into itself. There is no mist left now, no half-dreaming softness over the banks, no gentle uncertainty. Everything stands plain in the thin daylight, the ruts in the lane, the bent paling in the fence, the damp patches darkening the hut wall, the board where you have worked, the pail, the knife, the cloth bundle holding the fish you mean to trade or sell. Morning has turned practical. You stand a moment in the yard with the bundle in one hand and look toward the lane. The yellow dog has finished his scraps and now lingers near the ditch, pretending not to watch you, which is his least convincing habit. Beyond the reeds the river still shows pale between stems and willow roots, but its business with you is done for now. What remains is the landward half of the day, and that is a different kind of labour entirely. On the water, the net answers, or it does not. On land, every answer must pass through people. You tuck the cloth bundle more securely beneath your arm, check that the hut door will sit as closed as it ever sits, and step into the lane. At once the ground reminds you that medieval roads are less a convenience than a recurring punishment. Mud has dried in ridges from older cart tracks and softened again at the edges from last night's damp. Your boots sink a little, then pull free with all the quiet dignity of a saint losing patience. The lane smells of wet earth, chimney smoke, and somewhere farther up, cabbage being boiled into submission. The village lies only a short walk away, but in these places short distances are full distances. A leaning fence here, a puddle there, a neighbour at a gate, a cart taking up most of the world. Already life gathers around you in little scenes. A woman with rolled sleeves bends over a tub at her doorway, beating linen against a board with the grim rhythm of an old grievance. Two boys run past carrying sticks as if urgently summoned to some battle only they understand. A man in a fur-lined cap struggles to persuade a mule that forward is not a personal insult. The mule, with notable philosophical consistency, disagrees. You move through it at a steady pace, fish under your arm, one hand keeping the cloth from slipping. The bundle has a noticeable weight now, not crushing, but present enough that every few steps you shift it slightly. The shoulder you used for rowing complains first, then settles. You know this kind of carrying. A fisherman's day, like nearly every other working day here, does not end when the first task does. It simply changes shape and continues asking. The closer you come to the village centre, the more the air fills with small practical noise. Chickens dispute territory beside a wall. A hammer taps from somewhere behind a shed. A child is told not to do something, then clearly continues doing it. Smoke rises from several chimneys, each at its own angle depending on the breeze, and the smell of cook fires settles over the place like a second, more edible weather. There is oat porridge in one house, onions and dripping in another, coarse bread warming somewhere near the bakehouse, and from farther off, unmistakably, the rich salty scent of smoked fish from a stall or shed where someone wiser than most has planned ahead. You pass the little shrine at the fork in the road, the one with the doubtful relic. In daylight it looks even less convincing than usual, a niche of weathered stone, a smoke-blackened ledge, a faded painted face inside whose saintliness depends heavily on optimism. A scrap of blue wool has been tied to the branch above it. Beside the ledge lies a bent pin, 2 shriveled berries, and what might be a pilgrim badge or might be an unusually ambitious bit of scrap tin. No one can quite agree whether the object within is a holy splinter, a cart fragment, or a relic of somebody's stool. Yet people still pause there. Women touch the stone before market. Men nod to it on wet mornings. Children are warned not to mock it unless they want boils, poor weather, or algebraic punishment of some undefined but deeply rural kind. You do not stop long, but you incline your head as you pass. It costs nothing, and in a world like this people are wise enough not to insult whatever might be listening, even if it turns out to be only their neighbours. The market board stands near the centre of the village where the road widens enough to pretend at a square. It is no grand town market with striped awnings, foreign spices, and merchants who smell of silk and anxiety. This is a village exchange, muddy and modest, but lively in its own way. A few trestles have been set up. Baskets of onions, leeks, and turnips sit in uneven rows. One woman offers coarse rounds of cheese. Another has brown eggs nested in straw and watches them with the gaze of someone fully prepared to fight over fractions. A man under a patched awning displays smoked eels, dried peas, and 2 small sacks of barley that already seem overpriced simply from their posture. At the edge of it all, like mildew on a wall, stands the toll-keeper's table. Aldrin's warning was not misplaced. The man behind it wears an expression of bureaucratic vigilance sharpened by breakfast. He is not cruel exactly, only conscientious in the way that makes ordinary people wish briefly for plague. He has a wax tablet, a stylus, and the air of someone who believes regulations are the last fragile barrier between civilization and geese. His cap is neat. His beard is neat. Even his annoyance seems measured by rule. You join the loose little gathering waiting to approach the board. Ahead of you, a woman with turnips argues over whether 2 baskets count as one selling unit if one basket contains mostly leaves. The toll-keeper says no with visible satisfaction. Behind you, someone clears a throat loudly in the universal language of impatience. The yellow dog, astonishingly, has followed at a distance and now sits near a post, watching the whole business as if local commerce is part of his natural inheritance. When your turn comes, you step forward and set the bundle down. "Fish," says the toll-keeper, though this is obvious to every breathing creature present. "So I've been led to believe," you reply. He opens the cloth with 2 fingers, peers in, and gives the smallest possible nod. He's disappointed not to find a reason for moral superiority in the arrangement. Good. Let him work for it. After terse, he says, barely. Still after. He names the charge. It is exactly as Aldrin feared, a farthing dearer than the last time. You feel the annoyance rise in you like bad ale, but annoyance never reduced a toll in human history, so you pay with the expression of a man surrendering not coin but principle. The toll-keeper marks something on the tablet and reties the cloth with such care that you briefly suspect he missed his true calling as a nursemaid. By the time you take your place at the board, several village women have already noticed the fish. They always notice. Fresh fish has a way of brightening otherwise practical faces, not into sentiment, of course, into calculation, which is more useful. One of the cheese sellers, broad-faced and sharp-eyed beneath a brown hood, gives your bundle a glance that could skin bark off a tree. "What have you there?" she asks, though she knows perfectly well. "Wet treasure." She snorts. Let's hope it smells less like treasure than it usually does. You unwrap the cloth. The fish lie there as neatly as you can arrange them, cleaned and bright, respectable without pretending to grandeur. 2 perch, a bream, and several smaller fish, enough to interest people, not enough to cause a scene. The first bargaining begins almost at once. A woman with eggs wants 1 small fish in exchange for 6 eggs and a favour owed later. You decline the favour and ask for 8 eggs. She responds as though you have insulted her ancestors. A man in a patched tunic offers a measure of barley for the bream, and then spends so long mourning his own proposal that you begin to suspect he came mainly to rehearse sadness in public. The cheese seller circles back with a look at the perch and names a price too low to be serious. This is the true theatre of village trade, not greed exactly, but ritual caution. Everyone behaves as though generosity would tear the fabric of the known world. Yet beneath the haggling there is also a mutual understanding. These people know what a morning's catch costs in cold fingers and wet sleeves. You know what eggs, barley, and cheese cost in labour too. That knowledge does not remove bargaining, but it gives it shape. Some swear that the first sale of the day should never be refused outright, or bad luck will cling to the rest like damp wool. Others insist the first bargain must be resisted once, just once, to prove to the saints that you are not desperate. Those who tell the tale never fully agree. You compromise in the usual human way by refusing internally and accepting outwardly when the eggs woman returns with 7.5 in spirit and 8 in fact. The exchange pleases both of you only enough to continue living. Bit by bit the fish leave your cloth, 1 perch for barley and a little salt, the smaller fish for eggs and a short length of rough thread, the bream, after much discussion and 1 performative sigh from the buyer that should have earned applause for enough coarse flour to matter and a promise of turnips later in the week. Promises, of course, are the most unstable currency in the village, but some names are worth more than others, and this one may yet hold. By the time you finish, your bundle is lighter and your burdens are simply different. A little barley, a pouch of salt, eggs tucked carefully into straw, flour, thread, small things, but real things. Things that turn a morning on the river into meals, mending, and the faint possibility of a less hungry week. The yellow dog approaches at last and sits near your boot, looking up as if to ask whether market economics include his interests. You scratch him once behind the ear. It is a grave mistake. He leans into the touch with such shameless conviction that 2 women nearby smile before catching themselves. On the way back through the village, the day feels fuller somehow, as if by trading the fish you have made yourself part of its circulation. Smoke, salt, eggs, flour, gossip, thread, leaks, tolls, all of it moving from hand to hand, basket to basket, door to door. This is how the riverside truly comes alive. Not in banners or proclamations, in exchange, in muddy boots pausing at trestles, in women eyeing onions, in men pretending not to care about prices while caring deeply, in dogs hopeful beside posts, in children darting between adults carrying more news than messages. You pass the washboards again, the barking yards, the geese, the shrine, the leaning fences. The river glints pale beyond the reeds, and now in your arms you no longer carry fish, but what the fish have become: flour, salt, eggs, barley, thread, and the quiet satisfaction of having translated one slow morning's labour into the ordinary materials of survival. By the time your hut comes back into view, crouched as ever beneath its weathered roof, the village is fully awake behind you, clattering, smoking, bargaining, and carrying on. The shore, the lane, and the little market board have all done their part. The river gave, the village took its portion, and somehow enough remains for you to step back into your own yard feeling not rich, never rich, but provisioned. And in this world, provisioned is its own form of peace. You come back into your yard with the day's exchanges tucked against your chest and beneath your arm, and for the first time since before dawn, the morning no longer feels like something unfolding ahead of you. It feels gathered, brought in, folded down into forms a household can actually use: flour in its cloth, salt in its pouch, eggs cradled in straw, barley with its plain, sturdy promise, thread for mending, cheese and onion still waiting. The fish are no longer fish, at least not entirely. They have become the next meals, the next patch, the next small protection against want. This, more than the glimmer in the net or the tug on the line, is what makes a fisherman's labour real in the end. The yellow dog follows you through the gate with the composed boldness of someone who has decided he belongs here, unless formally litigated away. You do not argue. There are larger uncertainties in the world than one damp dog taking an interest in your yard. The hut waits, low and weathered, the same dark little shelter it was before dawn. Yet it seems changed because you have changed within it. The rushes on the floor are still flattened. The smoke still clings in the rafters. The half-burned beeswax candle still sits by the stool. The wool blanket in the corner still looks better at a distance than close at hand. But now there is food to set down, water to warm, and a little of the day already won. You put the eggs carefully on the shelf, the flour in the coolest dry place you have, the salt tied up again, the barley near the pot, the thread beside the small basket of mending. Each movement is simple and satisfying. The body likes the sight of provisions entering the house. It softens something inward. No one can quite agree whether that feeling comes from relief, pride, or sheer exhaustion deciding at last to be pleasant. Then you turn to the hearth. The fire is only sleeping, not dead. Beneath the ash a red seam still glows when you stir it with the iron. You feed it with kindling and a little split wood from the stack outside. Soon the embers brighten, then breathe flame again, low and eager. Smoke twists upward into the soot-black rafters. The smell of warm wood and old ash fills the room. It is not sweetness, exactly, but it is home. You take one of the fish set aside for the household, along with the onion and a little of the barley. The knife works more slowly now because there is no hurry left in it. The onion gives up its sharp scent as you cut it. Your eyes sting a little, though whether from smoke or onion or simply the body beginning to loosen is difficult to say. You put the pot on, add water, barley, onion, a pinch of salt, and after a little while the fish, broken into pieces that will soften and flavour the broth. It is humble food, It is excellent food. It is precisely the sort of meal the morning has earned. The dog settles by the door as if he has always understood the floor plan. From time to time, he opens one eye to check whether anything edible has become available through negligence. You toss him a small scrap when the broth begins to simmer. He accepts it with a solemnity so complete it almost feels liturgical. Outside, the village continues with its late-morning business. Through the shutter crack and the open door you hear the softened sounds of it cartwheels in mud, a woman calling out, geese objecting to something unspecified, the faint bark of another dog less successful than this one. Farther off, the abbey bell sounds again, gentler now across the broadening day. The same bell you heard before dawn when the floor was cold and the straw damp and the river mist still ruled the banks. It has followed you through the whole morning like a thread through cloth. As the broth cooks, you sit on the low stool and finally let stillness take you properly. Your hands rest on your knees. They are red from cold, nicked by cord and scale, smelling faintly of fish no matter how you rinse them. Your shoulders feel used, not injured, only deeply informed by the labour. Your boots steam a little near the hearth. The hem of your cloak dries slowly. The warmth reaches you in layers, first skin, then muscle, then something quieter under that. You think back over the morning without trying to arrange it into anything grand. The cold stone beneath your feet before dawn, the rushes, the damp straw, the smoke in the rafters, the bell over the river, the first push of the boat from mud into water, the mist over the reeds, the casts and the waiting, the abbey kitchens sending warm scents over cold current, the bread and weak ale in the sheltered inlet, the crows and charms and all the old sayings people fasten to birds, water, and luck because pure uncertainty is too bare to look at. Aldrin at the landing with baskets and gossip and cheese, the tale of blue lights by the old ford that no one will ever tell the same way twice, the better stretch of water, the careful mending, the market tolls, the barter, the path home, the sorting, salting, and cleaning. All of it ordinary, all of it, somehow, enough to fill a day before noon. Those who tell the tale never fully agree what makes a life feel full. Some would say coin, some would say comfort, some would say piety or property or strong sons, or a roof that leaks less than the neighbours. But sitting here now, with the pot beginning to smell of fish and barley and onion, with the dog half asleep by the door, with the hut holding warmth at last, fullness feels like something smaller and steadier. It feels like work that led somewhere, like a river answered, like a morning that did not fail you. You rise when the broth is ready and ladle it into a wooden bowl. Steam curls upward. The fish has softened into the barley and the onion, giving the whole thing a rich, salty scent that makes the room feel gentler at once. You cut a little cheese into it, just enough to melt at the edges and break in the last of the bread. The first spoonful is hot enough to warn you against foolishness. The second is better. By the third, the ache in your shoulders has become almost companionable. You eat slowly. There is no need now to ration attention. The worst of the day's uncertainty has passed. Around you the hut grows warmer, dimmer, safer. The light outside has softened from its thin late-morning clarity into something calmer, no longer sharp on the wall. The dog sighs in his sleep. Somewhere beyond the river, a cart sound fades. The bell does not ring again just yet. Even the air seems to settle. And as you finish the meal and sit a while longer by the hearth, the medieval world that held you all morning begins to loosen its grip, not vanishing. only growing softer around the edges. The river is still there, of course, moving past reeds and willow roots under the pale sky. The abbey still keeps its hours, the market board still stands in the mud. Somewhere the toll-keeper is probably being tiresome to someone else. Somewhere Aldrin is carrying home what he has managed to turn from onions and fish into the next necessities. Somewhere a monk is shutting a door against the breeze, and somewhere a woman is lifting linen from a line, and somewhere a child is being called in from the lane. The whole world continues in its quiet medieval way. But here, in this small hut with its soot-dark beams and its low warm fire, you no longer need to follow every sound outward. You can let them drift. You can let the day fold itself around you like a wool blanket that smells faintly of smoke and weather and use. Your bowl empties, the pot settles. The last little flames lower themselves around the wood with a soft, patient crackle. Light gathers in one pale strip across the floor, then thins. You rest your hands again, warmer now, and listen not to the labour ahead, but to the gentle evidence that for this moment there is no urgent labour left. The fish are salted, the goods are stored, the meal is eaten, the net can dry, the boat can wait, the world, which all morning asked something of you, finally asks only that you sit still. So you do, and the stillness deepens. The rafters hold the last threads of smoke as if they have all the time in the world. The rushes whisper faintly when the dog turns once in sleep and settles closer to the door. Outside, if there is wind, it has gentled into something too soft to trouble the walls. The river is no longer a task but a murmur somewhere beyond the reeds, low and continuous, like breath heard from another room. Even the bells, when they come again at a great distance, seem less like commands now and more like reassurance that time is passing exactly as it should. You feel the tiredness in your limbs spread out and soften, no longer sharp, no longer demanding, simply present, like warmth after cold. The morning's images lose their edges and drift together, mist on the water, silver fish in the net, abbey smoke in the pale air, the dog at the bank, a cheese wrapped in cloth, the little shrine by the road, reeds bending, water folding around the boat. Nothing hurries, nothing startles, everything grows dimmer, warmer, farther away. And in that dimness the medieval day becomes kind. The stone floor is no longer only cold, it is steady. The smoke in the rafters is no longer only soot, it is shelter. The worn blanket is enough. The low fire is enough. The small meal is enough. Beyond the hut, the roads, the markets, the tolls, the weather, the rents, the endless mending and carrying and counting can all remain where they are for a little while longer, quiet and harmless in the distance. You let your breathing slow to the rhythm of the room. The dog sleeps. The fire settles. The river goes on without asking anything more of you. And as the light fades softer and softer against the wall, and the warmth gathers close, and the whole long morning of water, mud, bells, fish, smoke, and labour recedes into a gentle blur, you feel the world grow still enough for rest at last.